Morning, members. To remind everyone that all your devices will be switched off and assembly tablets should be set to mute. And before the welcome. Agenda item number 1 is apologies. We have apology received from the chairperson, who may be unable to attend. We also received an apology from Danny Kinahan. Are there any further apologies, or is that it? Agenda item number 2, Chairperson's Business. Tabled today is a copy of a brief on Horizon 2020 funding opportunities by Minister Damien English that the committee received at yesterday's joint meeting with the Oireachtas Committee on Enterprise, Jobs and Innovation. The brief is on page 4 of tabled papers. Also tabled today is a press release for yesterday's meeting. This is in addition to those in your tabled papers pack. Are members content with the press release and that the clerks of both committees make any amendments as needed to the press release?
Great.
Are members content for the clerks to both committees to consider the priority areas and produce a paper for discussion at a future meeting?
Great.
Agenda item number 3, the draft minutes. The draft minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of October are at page 6. Are members content with the draft minutes? Great. Agenda item number 4, we have an oral briefing from the Minister of Enterprise, Trade and Investment on key issues and finance. Members, there are no papers for this item. The Minister will be speaking to the committee today on key issues and finance, and not the title that is in members' packs.
Not the title?
No, it's key issues and finance.
Chair.
Same thing.
Future reference would be helpful if a briefing paper was provided to the committee.
Morning.
Morning, Minister.
Morning.
The new bodyguard.
These are my new bodyguards, yes.
Morning, you're very welcome. I presume you have an opening presentation to make.
I have indeed. Thank you very much.
You can fire away whenever you're ready.
Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity to update you on a number of key priorities and issues that we're going to take forward over the next year in support of the programme for government and, of course, the economic strategy as well. Firstly, on the current economic situation, I think if we look at a number of independent recent surveys, they all show that the Northern Ireland economy continues to show encouraging signs of recovery. Economic activity as measured by the Northern Ireland Economic Composite Index has increased 1.2% above the level of 1 year ago. Employment has increased by around 21,000 jobs over the period, and the latest unemployment figures show the number of people claiming benefits has fallen for 21 consecutive months. I'm always a bit worried when I say that, because when it stops falling then it will be very much noticed, but 21 months in a row now, that's 12,800 people. The latest Danske Bank quarterly forecasts indicate growth will reach 2.6 this year and 2.3% next year. The Ulster Bank PMI indicated that local business activity and new orders continued to expand at a sharp pace in September, although the rate of expansion in new orders has eased. And results from the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce quarterly business survey suggest that the local economy continues to show some signs of stabilisation. So all positive from independent sources. Of course, the Department has played a key role in supporting those trends. Invest Northern Ireland has had a record year in 13-14 with almost 11,000 new jobs promoted, 4,700 of those by externally owned companies, and they have included significant recent announcements by Concentrix, Convergys and EY. In addition, 5,742 new jobs have been announced over this past 7 months by externally owned companies, with 1,729 new jobs announced by locally owned companies. So that's a total in this past 7 months of 7,471 new jobs. And I understand the Chief Executive from Invest will be presenting his mid-year performance review to you shortly. In terms of tourism, we have had a very positive opening this year. We've had an increase of 5% in trips from all markets and an increase of 10% in what visitors are spending whilst they're here. Holiday visits from the Republic of Ireland, a market which has experienced volatility in recent times, increased by 22% in the first 6 months of this year compared to the same period last year. With a very impressive 39% increase in spend, and again, major events demonstrating to the world that as a destination and a brand we have confidently moved on. So whilst the improvement in the local economy is to be welcomed, there is much work still to be done. It is important that we continue to deliver on Programme for Government commitments, on the economic strategy and on the need to rebuild and to rebalance the economy. The Department will be focused on a number of key issues in the coming months. Corporation tax, looking at exports, the cost of doing business and indeed business red tape as well. In terms of strategies moving forward, we have a number, as you know. We have the innovation strategy, the Horizon 2020 strategy, the strategy to tackle economic inactivity, which we have been developing with Dell, a life and health sciences strategy, and of course the agri strategy going for growth. Finally, Mr Vice Chairman, I wanted to obviously update the committee in relation to finance. You will have heard the draft budget set out yesterday. We continue to manage a very difficult financial context across the whole of the Northern Ireland Executive. My own department has a number of inescapable resource pressures in this year, 14-15, as a consequence of the success of Invest Northern Ireland, principally in delivering new jobs and investment projects, and the Tourist Board as well, in delivering a step change in events. Allocations made to the department in October monitoring have assisted considerably in the in-year position, although I've had to make a number of reductions to meet the cuts agreed by the Executive and to manage within the overall departmental allocation this year. For next year, 15-16, we've been provided with an additional 37.7 million. That is to cover existing inescapable pressures in the department, mainly relating to commitments already entered into by Invest Northern Ireland. However, in addition, and this is something perhaps that hasn't been talked about, the budget also applies a 15.1% reduction in the department's baseline. That's a 27.9 million cut. So therefore, we have been awarded 37.7 million to deal with inescapable pressures, but we're also having to deal with a 27.9 million cut. And so that's a difficult outcome to manage, particularly given that Invest Northern Ireland and the Tourist Board and tourism-related activities account for 78% of the departmental budget. And obviously a significant proportion of their budgets going into next year are already committed. Invest NI is forecasting a significant drawdown of expenditure in 15-16, coming from the bow wave, if you like, of announcements that they've made very recently, and therefore beyond that time we will have major budget constraints. So it's important, certainly from my perspective, that I do all that I can to support jobs. The economy needs to continue to grow and to become stronger. And it's equally important that we continue to help companies to export more, to attract new foreign direct investment, because all of those are fundamental to developing the economy and making Northern Ireland a more prosperous and a more inclusive society as well. So the Department and all of the arm's length bodies will be expected to find significant savings, and this will require a hard look at all areas for potential savings so that resources are concentrated on priority areas. The level of cuts proposed will inevitably mean that some activities will either be scaled back or halted, and work's now underway with the bodies to assess the implications of the draft budget from yesterday. So I hope I've summarised the key issues from my perspective in the department, the difficult financial position that we, along with other departments, find ourselves in, and of course I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Arlene, and Andrew and Eugene. I believe this is your first time appearing before this committee, so you're both very welcome. Chris has to go and ask questions if John Dowdy is making a statement, so we'll let him get his questions out of the way first.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks, Minister, for the outline. Just, you've mentioned a few times there about the situation where you've had to make a number of reductions to your budget and everything else to meet with the economic situation. Will such reductions, have they in the past and will they in the future be subject to an EQIA?
Well, when I looked, I have to go to all of the non-departmental, the arm's length bodies and indeed the departmental internally divisions to try and assess where it is. First of all, commitments haven't been made of a legal nature, so obviously if commitments have been made, then those have to continue to be supported. So that restricts us considerably, particularly in terms of Invest Northern Ireland, as to where we can find those cost savings. And so I will be looking very much at where those cost savings come from, maybe Andrew, if you want to say a word about what happens after those come to me from the various departments in the divisions in the department and the arm's length bodies. When they bring forward all that information to me, I will then speak to the chief executives of those organisations to see what impact it's going to have on frontline services, which is my first concern, I have to say, and being able to continue to grow the economy. But Andrew, if you want to set out what happens after that, that'd be helpful.
It's fundamentally a prioritisation process, rather than a change of policy. A policy change would trigger the obligations to consider equality impact and all that. That process can all be taken forward in a standard way, but certainly up to now it's been implementation of existing policy, and the question now is, do the changes of budgets require us to re-examine so fundamentally that we get into that? That remains to be seen. The question, first of all, is to prioritise what we have, to make sure that we have information for the Minister to consider from all the arm's length bodies, to look at their issues, look at their existing commitments, which are in some cases very high because they've had such success through the Invest Job Creation Programme, through the attraction of events for Sure Sport. So there is a high level of pre-committed resources, which then means that the choices available are more limited. But the question fundamentally is to prioritise those resources within the existing policy framework. And there could be a question further on, which might take us into the point to make. But
so the answer fundamentally then is no, an equality impact assessment wasn't done recently.
It hasn't
and there's
been,
no plan
no,
to do it.
there hasn't been one done.
And there's no plan. If the department can get away without having to do an equality impact assessment,
yes, we'll have to comply with the standard guidance. That's all well established practice.
Okay, well that is disappointing to hear, considering the impact upon different groups. Just finally, because I know there'll be plenty of people coming in. It's around the regional disparity of the jobs, and of course we welcome the fact that a number of jobs have been created. But a number of people will argue that with a heavy reliance upon computer and financial service industry jobs, this benefits the wider Greater Belfast area, and 75% of the jobs promoted by Invest have been in the Belfast area, and rural areas such as South Down, and I know others will talk about, seem to suffer and to lack. They cannot grab into this. Does the department have a policy or a plan to tackle regional disparity when it comes to job promotion in the north?
Eugene just wanted in on a supplementary to your first question, actually. Eugene.
Just in terms of the engagement that the Minister outlined that will occur across the department and with the arm's length bodies, we will be looking at the potential impact. We will be of reductions, so that there will be an engagement on proposed reductions and the associated impact assessments for those reductions. So just to clarify, that exercise is part of the budget engagement that will be taking place, but within the department and between the department and its arm's length bodies.
So it might not be called a formal EQIA, but it's certainly something we will be doing, because obviously if we're taking funding away, and we will engage with those people who it fundamentally affects, and that's why I'm saying prioritising frontline delivery is very much part of what we're doing. In terms of the job creation, and I know you'll have Alistair up with you very soon, I think we should all acknowledge the work that has been going on by Invest Northern Ireland, both internally in Northern Ireland and also right across the world to bring new jobs to Northern Ireland, and they've had, as I've said, a record year. You're right, some of the technology firms in particular will want to be in the capital city, and that has been proven to be the case. And they will also look at university provision as well, because they will want to be close to the universities. And therefore jobs have been announced in Belfast and in Londonderry because of that basis. But there are many job announcements that have been made, and no doubt Alistair will go through these with you, right across the country, particularly in sectors like agri-food, where, if I take Moy Park, for example, where they made an announcement of nearly 700 jobs, and that's across Ballymena, Dungannon and Craigavon. So there have been quite significant job announcements made, which take into account the rural area as well. But if you look at particular sectors, they tend to be in city centre locations, and we have to deal with that. And actually, a very interesting way of dealing with it has developed in my own area in the southwest, where the Smart Region are actually approaching technology firms to assess whether they could deliver some of those services in the southwest as opposed to in city centre locations, because the technology is there, and instead of having people travelling to work, can they accommodate those people in Enniskillen and in Omagh in a more meaningful way. So actually the southwest is trying to develop a new strategy to deal with that, and we're very supportive of that.
Thanks, I'm aware there's other people coming in. So.
Gordon?
Thanks, Chair, and I think we welcome the Minister and her staff. Andrew has came from health, so I think hope you find it a lot lighter perhaps, but obviously
Absolutely not.
challenging. Every bit is challenging, and Eugene, you're all very welcome. I think we would first of all recognise the positive news that has come out of the department and the work of the Minister and Invest NI in bringing new jobs. I think it's very positive. It comes across very well in times of negativity and times of disparity and all the difficulties there are in getting jobs. I think we need to record our thanks and appreciation to everyone involved, from the Minister down through the Department and of course Invest NI. In relation to the impact in next year's budget, Arlene, event tourism is something that a lot of our constituents recognise as a very positive thing right throughout Northern Ireland, and if we go on our weekend breaks and talk to various guest house owners and hotel owners, they do recognise the significance of it. So do you have a concern that event tourism could be at risk in these 15% cuts that you have to make?
Well, first of all, to talk about this year, because I know there's been a lot of concern raised in relation to the sponsorship element of the events fund, and the fact that we haven't opened a call for that section. Of course, we do that every year. We have a call normally around October where companies can apply in for up to £30,000 of sponsorship for their event. And I am very aware of the fact that there are a lot of people who look forward to us opening that competition every year. And we haven't been able to do that, and that was because of the budget constraints we found ourselves in. The international events and any event which already has a letter of offer, they will go ahead as planned.
Will be honoured.
They will be honoured. So if I look down the list of international events, the Circuit Ireland Rally,
Good.
Well, I knew that would please you. The Foyle Maritime Festival, the Northern Ireland Open Challenge, which of course is the golf, the International Northwest 200, the August Fela, the Ulster Bank Belfast Festival at Queen's, the Ulster Grand Prix, the Dale Farm Milk Cup and the Happy Days International Beckett Festival have all existing letters of offer which will be honoured moving forward into 15-16 and 16-17, because last year was just the first year of their 3-year deal, as it were. We have also commitments in relation to the tall ships, which was a hugely successful event the last time it was in Belfast. And we have commitments in relation to golf, in relation to the Irish Open next year in 2017, and indeed in relation to, we hope, the Open coming to Royal Portrush. So those are where the commitments currently are. I am, and I've asked the Tourist Board to come up and have a conversation in and around events funding for smaller events to try and establish if there's something we can do in year and whether we can move forward into 15-16. But I do think, Mr Vice Chair, that if we are able to pull together an event scheme for the sponsorship, it will be a smaller scheme if we're able to do it at all.
Okay, thank you. What about Invest NI? I think we all recognise that they do a good job. And do you see them looking at their own resources in-house to try and make savings, or do you see them as a significant organisation that we need to protect?
Well, absolutely. We want to continue to bring job opportunities to Northern Ireland to support our local firms in the creation of jobs, and we'll continue to do that. But Invest, like any other part of the apparatus, will have to look for substantial cost savings in administration in every other way. And indeed, we will be working with them over the next period of time, because there will be, as I'm sure you're aware, budget bilaterals taking place with myself and the Finance Minister in terms of this department, and we will be pushing very hard in relation to what it is we do and how we help Northern Ireland move forward. And we can only do that if we can facilitate the creation of jobs.
Okay, thanks, Minister. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Gordon. Arlene, you've stated that your department got an extra 30 million for commitments and agreements that have been made, but you've also had to sustain a cut of 15% on your baseline, or nearly 28 million. And you've referenced that some projects may be scaled back or halted. Have we any indication yet as to what you're actually talking about there? Because all we've seen as MLAs is the overall figure, and we haven't seen the detail from the department. Has that been worked up within the department yet?
Well, we are currently doing that. Obviously, this is still a draft budget, and the figure that we've been asked to cut is quite a significant figure, and therefore we will be drilling down very much with all of the arm's length bodies, and indeed in the department as well. The £30 million is essentially made up of commitments from Invest Northern Ireland moving forward, and indeed there are some Tourist Board commitments there as well. Those are commitments that have already been made, so whilst it looks very good that I'm achieving £30 million, those were commitments that are rolling forward, and I have to say are an indicator of the success of Invest Northern Ireland, and indeed the event strategy that we've had to move Northern Ireland confidently onward. So we will be having some very challenging conversations over the next month with all of the arm's length bodies, and indeed with the Finance Minister as well.
Okay, I presume you'll keep us updated?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. In terms of the targets that you're going to set for your arm's length bodies in the next financial year, is there any indication as to what sort of ballpark figures you're looking at for those?
In terms of
targets for job creation and economic output through Invest NI and the Tourist Board?
For 15-16, those will be set. Obviously, the job creation targets were set in the programme for government, so actually they were an executive commitment as opposed to a commitment directly for us. Obviously, we had to deliver on that commitment, and we will of course be discussing this issue at the economic subgroup of the executive, because when we're setting targets we'll have to take into account the financial capability to deliver on those targets, where we are economically, what does the pipeline look like. So we will take all those into consideration in setting the targets, but we will be doing that as a whole in the executive. We'll be setting all of those targets.
Okay. In terms of the programme for government commitments, one of those was around the whole issue of regional imbalance and trying to ensure that there was sustainable economic growth in all regions. And, you know, the point that Chris makes about the huge number of jobs that's been created in Belfast is very welcome, but there is huge resentment in other areas that the same proportion of jobs aren't being created everywhere. And, you know, we can make the point that Invest NI are having huge success in job creation in Belfast, but there seems to be a lot of emphasis being put on providing services as opposed to actually manufacturing stuff. Can you give us an indication as to what efforts Invest are making to try and encourage manufacturing companies to base themselves here?
Well, we've had quite a few. Well, first of all, I don't accept that there's a huge amount of resentment in Northern Ireland. I actually, when I go right across Northern Ireland, and I have the privilege of doing so on a day-to-day basis, and meeting firms, they are all very much buoyed up by the fact that the Northern Ireland economy as a whole is growing. As I've indicated to you before, there are certain sectors that will want to be based in the capital city, and I think that's true whether you're in Belfast, Dublin or London, and those firms will want to be in the capital city. And instead of saying to those firms, you know what, we don't want you unless you go to a regional area of Northern Ireland, we don't want you to come to Belfast, we should embrace those firms coming to Belfast and instead say to them, what else can we do to encourage you to maybe think about putting people into other regions of Northern Ireland? What is it that you're looking for that we have in those regions? Is it skills? Is it quality of life? Is it education for your family? And that sort of proactive and positive way of welcoming people to Northern Ireland, I think, is a much more sensible way of dealing with the fact, rather than to say that regions of Northern Ireland are resentful of the fact that jobs are going to Belfast. In terms of manufacturing, we have had some very good manufacturing announcements over this previous year. When I think of Schrader in Antrim, they are doing very well, so much so that actually they were bought over recently. I think of Whale Pumps in Bangor, which Mr Dunn will be very familiar with, and the great success that they have had. I think of even the agri sector, which is a manufacturing sector in and of itself, and the way in which it continues to grow. Wrightbus in Ballymena and the way in which it has grown. Yes, we do have a difficulty with JTI Gallagher, but I think it has been accepted that that's a very peculiar incidents with very special circumstances around it, not least European directives which are forcing them to go in a particular direction. So the manufacturing sector continues to grow, and I think that's been accepted universally by the commentators in the press, and we will continue to support it.
In terms of the economic outlook, 21 months in a row with fewer people on the dole every month is certainly positive news. And if you look at the figures produced on the 15th of October, unemployment figures are down 5% in the last quarter, or 5,000 in the last quarter. But similarly, the number of people that are economically inactive has actually increased by 9,000 in that same quarter. And since June 2011, there's actually 20,000 more people here who are economically inactive now than they were 3 years ago. So I'm aware that yourself and Stephen Farry are producing a strategy to try and tackle economic inactivity. Has any progress been made on the development of that strategy and what you are trying to do to get these people back into jobs, but actually to also create jobs for them?
Yeah, we've had some good progress in relation to the economic inactivity strategy, and that's been led by Dell, as you know, but we've been working very closely with them. And following endorsement from the Executive Subcommittee on the Economy during the summer, Dell has commenced an audit of existing service provision for the target inactive groups identified in the framework document, and I do anticipate that a final strategy will be developed by the end of this calendar year, and I know it's something that members have been waiting on. I know that a number of members have spoken to me about the desire to engage in pilot work right across the province, and I welcome that. I think it's very good that some of the members have been proactive in their own constituencies and have been looking for ways in which to deal with this huge issue, and it is a big issue continually for us. It's a legacy issue, we're aware of that, but it's something that we very much need to tackle, particularly in the region of mental health, which is one of the strategic areas for us in relation to economic inactivity. It does concern us, the number of people who are out of work, who have mental health issues, and how we can deal with those people in a positive way is a real priority for me, and I know it's a priority for the strategy as well.
Well, thanks. Stephen?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for coming. And obviously, what's been a key time for the Executive, their department, along with everybody else. In the issue of budget, when we had officials from your Finance Department here presenting in the June monitoring round, I queried an issue, the issue of putting in inescapable bids. In some cases, what for me were predictable
Yeah.
and inescapable. I was told that was normal practice. Is it good practice?
Well, my budget baseline was actually reduced during the time when Invest Northern Ireland were having to hand back money because commitments that they believed were going to have to be fulfilled weren't fulfilled because people were reprofiling their letters of offer and that they were not pulling down money in the way that Invest Northern Ireland believed that they would. And therefore the baseline was pulled back. And as a result of that, then when the wave came in terms of having to facilitate more commitments, I then had to apply in to the centre in monitoring rounds to try and get that money to deal with those issues. And that, to be fair to the executive, they have answered that call on most occasions, and I think it's a demonstration of them recognising in the programme for government that the economy is a #1 priority, and also something called the industrial guarantee, which is there as well, which says that no good job creation opportunity will go by the wayside, and I do call on that from time to time and bring commitment calls to the executive. So it's not of my making is the short answer. We have had to bid in on a number of occasions, and indeed in the monitoring round that we're just out of have been successful again. As you've probably seen in the draft budget yesterday, we have been allocated 7.7 million to bring our baseline back up again. I welcome that, and I think it's something that we will continue to look at, and something I certainly want to discuss with the Finance Minister as well.
Specifically in this monitoring round, there was a Northern Ireland Tourist Board an escapable bid of 4.55 million.
Yes.
I mean, that includes events like Northwest 200, Milk Cup, August Fia, Ulster Grand
Your
Prix.
Irish isn't as good as mine. see?
No, it's not.
Still better than Gregory Campbell's.
But to me, these were predictable events. These are something the department would appear to me would have committed to, known were coming. Should these not have been covered in the budget for the year, as opposed to waiting to monitoring rounds? Because essentially these were contractual obligations. If, due to the various financial pressures, the Finance Minister had said no, where would that have left the department, given these were contractual commitments?
Well, if the Department of Finance and the Executive had rejected those bids, then we would have had to look to other areas of the department where we would have had to have found those bids. But I think I've explained why we've had to engage in the bid process as opposed to having it in our bottom line. It's a historical issue. It's one that I hope has now been fixed. And I think going forward...
we were told it was normal practice.
Well, I think it was normal practice since my baseline was cut back, to be blunt. And it certainly has been the practice over this past couple of years where I have bid in when issues of pressure have arisen. But going forward, I think you'll still see me bidding in for various things that come up during the year. I think as long as we are able to show to the Finance Minister and to the wider executive that it's to the benefit of Northern Ireland, I think executive colleagues have recognised that. And sometimes, you know, the executive gets criticised for not working together. I think on the whole, in terms of economic development, the executive has worked well together and recognised when there's a need to pull together and move forward that we do that. Sorry, Andrew, did you want to come in?
Just long-term perspective, dealing with budgets such as that of Invest NI and Tourist Board has always been, over decades, it's been to a degree unpredictable.
Yes.
The kind of scale of things that we've been bidding for routinely in rounds, in a normal cycle, that wouldn't be untoward. So I think what the colleague said earlier
the Northwest
is okay.
200 is predictable. You know.
Fair enough, but the scale of the issue isn't so much. Like, the reason it's more tricky at the moment is simply because the total budgetary context is more difficult. So that's what's making it more challenging now. And is it normal? Is it a good way of doing things? Actually, probably in a normal course of things, yes, it is. It's perfectly acceptable to have.
And there hasn't been an
things
issue,
unforeseen.
Issue.
Even some things that are maybe foreseen but not firm. You can deal with that normally, but we have a slightly more complex problem at the moment.
Okay. Minister, you stated in relation to the events fund, I would certainly like some sort of an events fund, but we'll have to see whether the money is available for it. And you made reference that, however, let us see what happens in the 2015-16 budgetary discussions. You're one of the few departments that's had an increase. I don't think you could have hoped for a better outcome given the circumstances. You might have wanted a better outcome, but I don't think you could have hoped for it. You sort of gave some hope in that statement. If you got a good outcome, the events fund could be saved. Can you give that commitment today?
Well, I think I've indicated to you that whilst I am put on the plus side when it comes to the draft budget along with the Department of Health, that is because of inescapables that Invest Northern Ireland have had to bid in for very good reasons, and the Finance Minister has referenced that when he talks about positive pressures on the budget, and that £30 million that has been allocated is largely already spoken for, if I can use that phrase, whereas we still have to make that 15.1% reduction, 27.9 million, and in a budget the size of mine, that's a very significant amount of money, particularly when 78% of the budget belongs to either tourism issues or Invest Northern Ireland. So in terms of the events fund, I mean, let's be clear, I don't want to cut the events fund because I recognise more than anybody around this table the benefit to local communities of those events. I recognise the economic return. The reason why we had to do what we did was because we didn't have the funding in year to deal with the events fund for 14-15. I am looking at this year, 14-15, to see if I can do an events fund of a smaller nature. Whether that's possible or not, we'll know very soon. Going forward into 15-16, we're going to have a more radical look at the events funding to see what it is we can do to try and support those local community groups. And I know some colleagues around the table made comments about, oh, you're supporting the big events, you're not supporting the community events. That's wrong. The reason we did that was because there was legal commitments for the bigger events already made because of the 3-year process, and they've benefited from that 3-year process, let's be honest, whereas the smaller events funds it's a bidding process every year, and therefore there was no legal commitments, and people can't assume that they're going to have funding. They will apply in every year and they will be in a competition. So essentially for 14-15 for this year, I'm actively looking to see if there's something I can do. I know it's later in the year for people and that affects them in terms of their planning, but hopefully we'll be able to say something around that soon. 15-16 is a more fundamental issue.
In terms of going forward then, you mentioned the international events working on a 3-year cycle. Is that something that could be looked at to give sustainability to some of our more local festivals? Yeah,
well that takes us up I think to 2018. Am I right about that, Andrew? I think it is 2018 for the, 2017. So that's beyond this mandate, if you like, of the Assembly. So that will be for whoever the Minister of Enterprise, Trade and Investment is in the next mandate, as it were, to deal with. So this takes them up right to 17.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister.
But you'd support multi-annual funding for events?
Well, I have done in the past, Vice Chair, and the reason why we've had to pull it back is because of financial issues. As I say, we are going to look at the 14-15 issue, to see if there's something we could do for this year, to try and give some help and assistance to those community events, and then we're going to have a more fundamental look in 15-16.
Okay. Fergal? Fergal?
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Minister. And can I too welcome the good news that's associated with job increases and, pardon me, reduction in unemployment. But as has been said, it does disguise some of the wider issues around long-term economic inactivity, etc., etc. And while colleagues talk about that in rural areas, of course, it's also true that Belfast isn't one homogeneous unit, that some in there are vast tracts of west, north, east and south Belfast that aren't benefiting either. But one of the things that occurs to me is that, and it comes into sharp focus because of the budgetary situation, is that, for example, there are huge pressures on the health budget, but they emerge or are directly related to those very
Yes,
issues of
absolutely,
long-term.
yes.
So why is more not made, given that some of that responsibility then falls to you and some other departments that might be able to deal with that, why is more not made of that at an executive level, of dealing with those issues, which in a longer term way can reduce the pressure on health, which is the biggest spending budget?
Well, you make a very interesting point, and certainly economic inactivity and some of the very clear underlying issues are certainly not an issue for my department alone. I recognise the role that we play, particularly in areas like the social economy, particularly in areas of job creation in some of those areas. But certainly the health department plays a key role in trying to deal particularly with mental health issues, and those are issues that we do discuss, and certainly in terms of preventative measures and how we encourage those with mental health problems into the workforce is something that will be a priority in the economic inactivity strategy. So whilst it belongs to DEL and DETI, you will see it much wider than that when it comes out, and I hope I do believe it is a good strategy, but like any other strategy, it's only as good as the actions that it delivers. I mean, it's no good having a good strategy unless it delivers
but it also,
outcomes.
yes, but it also needs to be done in a timely way and with some urgency, if you like.
Yes, I agree.
And we're now 7 years since 2007 and the reinstitution of the institutions. But with the crisis, you can do two things, and I suppose last week with the budget and all the rest of it is a crisis. You can do things, you can batten down the hatches, or you can radically change. And wasn't there an opportunity in this, even in this budget crisis, to radically change thought around that and say, we'll do something different with the budget?
Well, I think we have. We've recognised the importance of the Department of Health and the need to protect frontline services, the need to be able to deliver an effective health service. But if I can point you to the work that we are doing with the Department of Health in and around connected health, in and around health innovation, that is all new, and it's all designed to be innovative in the area of healthcare. And I know Andrew is very much an expert in this field, but it's something Minister Poots and I signed up to some considerable time ago. We're beginning to see the benefits of that, whether it's the electronic medical records or the innovation that's happening up in the Centre for Connected Health. The fact that we are internationally connected on all of those issues, I think, is a good indicator of how you can do things differently. Andrew, do you want to say?
Well, sure. I mean, it's both in terms of changing the way the health system is working. I've spent many years in that field in terms of seeing how looking at things differently can take us towards the kind of public health-led preventative strategy that's been what we've been seeking to do, and that has to address right up front the issues in mental health and dealing with that as the long-term neglected area of health provision, a vital part of what we do. Yeah. So lots more to go down, but a really strong direction from both ministers. That's something we had from several years ago, to see that impetus coming through, and it has to be creative and innovative, and adopting exactly as you say. New ways of doing things, both in technology, but all the more important.
But I'm talking about within this. I'm talking about within this budget. I mean, I don't see the evidence, if you like, that within this budget it was a batten down the hatches budget, as opposed to radically changing an approach which would say, look, let's do something about these things that are impacting on health and do something radical.
But you see, I think you're making an assumption that's much too early to make, Fergal, because this is a draft budget. There will be a lot of to-ing and fro-ing between the departments and the Department of Finance. There will be details put on to the flesh of the budget, and indeed I presume I will be back talking about that in the next month or so. And I think then you can challenge us about doing things differently. But you know the problem about doing things differently sometimes, Fergal? We get challenged when we try to do things differently because there are consequences to doing things differently. And I think if the MLAs and Assembly are keen to have a step change in various areas, then they have to be big enough to support the ministers when they do decide to do something radical and something different. And I hope that members will do that when we bring forward our proposals.
One of the other areas, and it's no coincidence I'm talking about the enterprise and health, because I sit on the health committee as well, and of course in the context of South Belfast, but not just selfishly so. The idea of investing in the cancer centre for excellence would have enormous economic benefits for here if it was embraced in a holistic way. And wouldn't that have been one of the potential radical ideas that could be brought to the table and saying, we're going to invest in this to make a difference, and you'll be conscious of the San Diego experience,
Yes.
etc., which show that governmental decisions, so there's proof there. And,
But again, and I mean, I'm very up for this conversation because, and can I say, Vice Chair, I think the experience of having committee members out in San Diego was a very positive one. It was a positive one for me, but it was also, I think, a positive one for the members that went out as well, so that they could see what we were actually doing in San Diego and what we were trying to achieve. And in San Diego, I had some very interesting conversations with clinicians about doing things differently around drugs, around genomics, around being very specific around issues like that. So, and I am at danger here, I have to say, Vice Chair, of going into another ministerial colleague's portfolio. But instead of just saying we need more drugs, to actually say specifically what drug do you need, and using innovation and using technology to actually do that. And that's a very exciting area, not only for the health service, but for Almac, for Randox, for some of our very fabulous and brilliant companies that we have who continue to have a global presence and drive this whole area of genomics. It's hugely exciting. It's something I'm very committed to. So if you're asking me, can we do something different? Yes, let's do something different, but let's know that when we do that, we have to pay money into that particular area, and therefore there'll be consequences in another area.
But what I'm suggesting is that we don't become paralysed by the black hole of our debt.
Absolutely, we should see it.
We need to do something.
And you know what, Fergal, if I can say this to you, there are a lot of companies across Northern Ireland, when they faced into the black hole of debt in 2008, 2009, had to take some very, very difficult choices that perhaps they wouldn't have otherwise made. But you know what? Their firms are a lot better because of those decisions. They've become, if you like, of necessity, a lot more leaner in what they're doing, and I've seen that as I go around the country. So we should look at that example and try to do something likewise.
Just to add, in terms of working between DETI and DHSSPS, the Minister mentioned the Life and Health Sciences strategy. That work is underway. That's to bring together a greater cohesive approach between academic, the health and social care sector, and Invest and the department, to actually bring greater focus between industry, academia and government into looking at how best to deliver a much more coherent approach to health and life sciences.
And just the reason that I continue to emphasise it is that people will lose faith in something against the backdrop of battening down the hatches, if you like, and feeling that there is no value in a discussion about investment, when in fact this is the absolutely appropriate moment for saying this is why we'll do something different.
Absolutely.
And if that can be injected into the next 8 weeks, I think that would be an important.
Well, if any message goes out from this committee meeting today, I hope that's the message that goes out.
Can I just briefly just add my support for the events fund? I think it's very important that once again we don't lose sight of the value that the money brings back in terms of people coming here. Can I ask about broadband, because here's some sort of conflicts around with the impact this is having. Is there an assessment being done about how this is kind of a double negative, if you like, that businesses aren't investing in rural areas because of the absence of capacity?
No, we're not doing that sort of assessment. What we are engaged in at the moment through, I never get these titles right, the Broadband Fund, is to ensure that more people and more businesses have access to broadband. We've also got the mobile infrastructure project underway as well. So rather than looking at the negative, we're trying to provide a positive answer. And I mean, when you look at rural enterprise centres like OMA, like the Clinton Centre in Enniskillen, their connectivity is absolutely excellent. So we need to now start telling the world about that. So in actual fact, when people talk about the sticks, as I've heard Fermanagh referred to, it's actually true. By the way, we've 30% of the forestry in Fermanagh, so we are actually the sticks. But I'm embracing being the sticks. We actually have as good connectivity as anywhere else in Northern Ireland. So instead of allowing that to become the narrative, we need to give the true story of what's happening in the southwest and indeed in other parts of Northern Ireland as well.
Okay, and just finally,
Finally, 3 questions ago. finally, 3 questions ago. You've turned into Trevor McDonald.
It's my upbringing.
Finally.
Intertrade Ireland is once again an organisation that's about bringing money in.
Yes.
It's about seeing the benefits of tomorrow, as opposed to just being an organisation that spends taxpayers' money. And obviously it's got good ambition around 2020 targets, etc. And it speaks to the island as well, because there's joint ambition there. Is it advisable in that context to cut budgets of organisations like that, even against this backdrop?
Well, I could make that argument about every single arm's length body which I'm engaged with, Fergal. I think they're all performing a service. I think they're all doing well. Intertrade Ireland, I'm pleased to say, have been working well with Invest Northern Ireland. They're working well with our universities as well, particularly in relation to Horizon 2020. They are providing a good service. And some of their programmes have been very successful when I look at the return on investment that they have. I think they've become a leaner organisation even before what is happening now. They used to have a plethora of programmes. They actually honed that into very specific programmes to deal with the issues that were before them. I welcome that, and Thomas Hunter McGowan is doing a very good job. But like every other part of the department, they have to take the issues that we have in front of us, and we will engage not only with the Board of Intertrade Ireland, but also with my counterpart as well in relation to the issue, Richard Burton.
Okay, finally, thank you.
And in terms of the decision your department has taken to cut Intertrade's budget by 420,000, was there any discussions with the department in the south with regards to the funding ratio of Intertrade Ireland and the knock-on implications of that?
Well, first of all, let me say that when they made particular cuts back about 2-3 years ago, there was no discussion with me about the cuts that were being made by the Republic's government to the Intertrade Ireland budget. So there is no precedent, if you like, for me to have the agreement of Richard Bruton to what's going on. Having said that, of course, I'm going to discuss the issues with Richard in relation to Intertrade Ireland, and indeed we've had correspondence between each other about the issue. It was an issue that was raised at the North-South Ministerial Council as well, and it's an issue that we will move forward on. But I mean, we put in a third, they put in 2/3. That's the way it normally is.
And is the NSMC due to meet in trade and business sectoral format some stage soon, is it? Off the top of your head?
It is. It must be. It must be, because I haven't had one recently, so it must be due to meet soon.
Megan?
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation so far. Just kind of leads neatly on from that point, just to stress the importance of the island economy, and obviously it generates a huge amount of money every year, and the larger return of that is to our local economy, and I think Intertrade are important in that, because the South are such a huge partner for us, not least in terms of exports. But I'm sure you're aware, yesterday we had a joint committee meeting with the Oireachtas Committee for Jobs, Innovation and Enterprise, and I think there was a general consensus around the table, maybe with the exception of Gordon, that it's really, really important to develop the border region. There's higher levels of job losses, emigration, and arguably more barriers to trade than there is anywhere else in the north, given the proximity to the border. And the Centre for Cross-Border Studies are in with us, and they're actually quite critical of Invest and IDA. Given the problems the border region faces, even a small injection or a small bit of energy would make such a huge difference. So do you think that the Invest and IDA could be working better together, or what's their current relationship like?
Well, Invest and the IDA have a very, very positive relationship. I'd go as far as to say they've never had a better relationship, actually, and they work very closely together. I presume that this is a report by Professors Bradley and Best you're referring to, is that right? We were disappointed that they hadn't referenced a lot of the information that we had furnished to them in the report. and disappointed about the report because firms in the border region, of course, show a stronger propensity to export into, in our case, into the Republic of Ireland. And indeed, they are stronger propensity to export than they have than any other place in Northern Ireland. So Intertrade Ireland, from a proportional point of view, would work closer with firms in the border region than they do in Coleraine and places like that. And so much so that I actually said to Intertrade Ireland a couple of years ago that I felt that they needed to push beyond the border and actually deal with companies. And I know that my counterpart in the Republic did the same, because he was getting criticism from areas, perhaps in Cork and Kerry. They weren't engaging with Intertrade Ireland in the way that they felt that they were. So instead of just being a border agency, it was actually meant to facilitate trade between the two parts of the island. The area, and this is an area which we do want to look at that does concern me, is the fact that border firms have a weaker propensity for innovation. In other words, their innovation isn't as strong as elsewhere. And the Interreg 4A operational programme, which is now out for consultation, looking at the needs of the border region, and certainly in the area of innovation, I think that this is something that we could look at across border innovation, and the need to be more innovative in the border region. Sounds to me as if that's a real need, and certainly from the point of view of applying Interreg 4A, I think that's something that we could look at.
Yeah. Well, I know there is a huge entrepreneurial spirit along the border region as well, just given the barriers that there have been, and I suppose the historic lack of investment that people in the area would feel there hasn't been. But I'm conscious of time, so I'm sure you're aware of the NIPA report that was released recently about the accurate economic data in the north, and it basically surmised that we are relying on estimates rather than cold hard facts to underpin the executive economic strategy. And I suppose that's not to take away from the brilliant work that is being done by the likes of Invest, and I was fortunate enough to see it in action in California in June. But there does seem to be a hesitancy on your department and also DFP to go after that accurate economic data that we really do need. But surely we could only enhance our performance by having a fuller picture, particularly in the current climate.
Well, we are actually working now. Sometimes the answers are not necessarily within government, the answers are outside of government, and we're working with the Northern Ireland Centre for Economic Policy. They are doing particular pieces of work for us, and I think we can use that centre more effectively than actually spending more money internally in government. We can actually ask for particular pieces of work. And Neil Gibson has been in with me just recently to talk about those pieces of work, and I think that is the way forward for us as an economic department, to look at the independent data that's there and then to have some analysis on that. And certainly they are doing a piece of work for us at the moment on air passenger duty. And we're looking forward to that piece of work to see where it is we can make changes in Northern Ireland terms. And I think it's very good to have our own Centre for Economic Policy as well.
Thank you.
William?
Thanks, Vice Chair. Minister, thanks very much for your presentation this morning and the positive good news story that you brought, though you wouldn't think so listen to the last half hour. You know, I think the number of jobs that are being created in Northern Ireland in the economic climate that prevails, not just in the Kingdom but across the globe, in the last year in particular has been excellent, and I think all credit must go to you and to the Invest Northern Ireland team, because I think if I'm right, outside of London, most foreign direct investment jobs in any UK region have come to Northern Ireland. I think that's all credit to the team that has gone out and sold this place in such a positive way. Having said all of that, you have painted a picture in terms of your comments on the budget and the economy at the moment that is the realpolitik that some people clearly don't want to face up to. Last week I met with business people in the city of Belfast, from across industry to traders in the city centre and tourist professionals, and they are hugely complimentary in terms of the work that's being done, so I wanted just to pass that on to you. In terms of tourism, which is obviously hugely important, is there a way in which we can, because obviously attracting people coming in and the spend that they have and the figures that you've given us this morning are hugely positive and important to our economy, But is there a way we can soften that, given, and I'll come on to Tourism Ireland and
Yeah.
Tourist Board in a moment, is there a way we can soften that in terms of the RPA? Does that provide an opportunity in terms of new councils that will have the greater economies of scale and regional tourism partnerships for them to step in to assist and put more resource into promoting their regions or their particular council areas?
Well, thank you for your positive comments. In terms of job creation, we actually passed the City of London in the summer per capita in terms of foreign direct investment. So we were the leading region of the UK in terms of foreign direct investment per head of population. I think that's something we should be incredibly proud of, given where we've come from. In terms of tourism, one of the issues around tourism, it's a very good news story, but everybody wants to be a part of it, and sometimes that's a great thing, but sometimes it can be a challenge because it can be quite fragmented across Northern Ireland. And so we have Tourism Ireland, we have the Northern Ireland Tourist Board, we have the councils, we have the regional tourism partnerships, we have other organisations, hotel federations and what have you. They all want to be a part of the tourism story, and certainly what we've been trying to do over this past period of time is to join all of those voices up together and to have one voice for tourism. And in some of the bigger events, that has worked really well, particularly the Giro d'Italia. I think that the councils, the Northern Ireland Tourist Board, Tourism Ireland, and indeed other agencies like the Road Service and the Police Service all worked together in such a proactive way that it really delivered a very good message for those looking into Northern Ireland and indeed for the visitors as well. And so moving forward, I hope that the local councils will recognise the 9 destination areas. Although there's 11 councils, there are 9 destination areas for tourism in Northern Ireland. I hope in areas where councils have to work together because perhaps they go across council boundaries, thinking in particular about the Mournes, that they will work together and they will work with the destination partnership that's there to promote a very positive view of their particular area. But they must do so in the context of what it is that they're trying to achieve. So if it's international visitors that they're trying to bring in, then they must work with Tourism Ireland in a very proactive way. If they want to bring visitors up from the Republic of Ireland, they should work with Northern Ireland Tourist Board. So it's really a plea for the tourism agencies to be more joined up, because when they do work together, they have a very, very strong message and a very good offering.
Yeah, I think in my experience, obviously, as a former Belfast City Council, Belfast has had that resource that perhaps other councils, not a criticism, they just haven't had the resource to do that. But now that opportunity is provided, so you would hope that that would actually work in a better way across the other councils outside of the city. In terms of Tourism Ireland, then, in terms of the budgetary pressures, and I appreciate that this is a job of work that's still ongoing, are there any indications of, have you met with Tourism Ireland, or have you any indications in relation to the implications there may well be for Tourism Ireland and indeed the Northern Ireland Tourist Board in terms of these budgetary pressures?
Well, like all the other bodies, there will be pressure on Tourism Ireland. I've met with the Chief Executive and the Chair recently, and that was in and around the October monitoring and the in-year pressures. I will, of course, be talking to them again about the 15-16 picture. I did say to Chief Executive when I met him that the GB market, which is a critical market for tourism for Northern Ireland, has to still get attention, and that that we had to prioritise our markets where we were getting the most bang for our buck, if you like. And the GB market, and again it's been shown in the first 6 months of this year, is a very strong market for us. So we want to encourage that market and try and get more visitors to come from that market. And I did say that to Niall when I spoke to him recently. So we will have those conversations. It's important, as with all of these things, that Northern Ireland gets standout in the GB market from Tourism Ireland. That's very well understood by Tourism Ireland, and we'll move forward and try and bring more tourists here.
Okay. Finally, can I ask you, Minister, we welcome the recent additions to the international air travel destinations. Are there negotiations ongoing with other potential airlines and other international destinations? And I know you're particularly keen in terms of North America to reach out.
And I welcome the fact that there's been a new flight announced today to Barcelona from the city airport, and that's a new carrier into the market, so that's good news, and I welcome that. But yes, there are a number of other conversations going on in and around access, because I have learned very quickly in this job, the more access we have directly into Northern Ireland, the more visitors we achieve, and indeed for business travellers as well, it's a lot easier if they can come directly in to either Belfast International or indeed Belfast City. So yes, there are a number of conversations going on, Middle East, Canada, Europe, a number of conversations, and I hope some of those will bring us some new routes soon.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Stewart.
Thanks. Stephen wants to go in quickly. Just.
It's just Mr. Humphrey maybe alluded to some of us not being as positive as he has, and I find it hard to be sort of cheering when we've more people in work poverty than we have in out of work poverty. In terms of the companies that invest in, I would support. Has there been any consideration of requiring for them to receive public money that they become living wage employers?
No, there hasn't been, because actually if you look at what the interventions we have engaged in, particularly since 2008, it was trying, with the Jobs Fund, we were trying to provide jobs, because that's where the pressure was at that particular point in time. As you know, we were losing quite a number of jobs, 2007, 2008. The cry went up that we needed to create jobs, and it wasn't all about the brain surgeons and the highly qualified technicians, that we needed to provide jobs at a particular level. We did that. The Jobs Fund has been hugely successful right across Northern Ireland. I think that was the key about the Jobs Fund, whether you were creating 5 jobs in a huddle or 2 jobs in a skill, and they were able to help out. And so we haven't been engaged in that living wage debate, but I know it's a debate that will now come to the fore as the economy begins to settle. Then people will look at their wages and say, well, we're not earning enough. And for me, what I'm trying to do is to lift the productivity of Northern Ireland and to bring more higher value jobs into Northern Ireland. And before the downturn came, that was very much the strategy: bring in high-end jobs, lift the productivity, close that gap between us and the rest of the UK. Then we had to go back and create jobs of a certain level, and I needed to do that. That was something that was appreciated right across the chamber. But now we're looking at the productivity issues again and the need, and certainly that will be a discussion with the Invest Board. I have no doubt about higher value, supporting higher value jobs as opposed to lower value jobs. And I'm being as frank as I can with you, Stephen. The lower value job issue didn't come to the fore during 08, 09 and 10 because we were just creating jobs.
I appreciate that you are being candid on the issue. I suppose a couple of points I would make is that the evidence shows living wage increases productivity. But I would also argue that those maybe low-skilled jobs that you're referring to, the argument is that they should command a living wage.
Yes, and I hope
nobody
that,
should be paid less.
No, and I'm not going to argue against that, but I think as the economy grows stronger, people will have the ability to pay higher wages, and certainly from my perspective that's where we all want to be, that people can have those higher wages, and therefore it helps the economy generally because they're spending that money in retailers, they're spending it in the hotels and restaurants at the weekend, and therefore it helps the whole economy. So I'm not arguing against that.
Thank you.
Sydney?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. I'm a long day, you and your officials. And can I just say at the outset as well, congratulate you on the great work that's been done this past year, and with Invest NI and jobs promoted and jobs created. So well done, and hopefully even in these difficult economic times, that as we go forward, that will continue. And it's obviously more work to be done there, and due to these economic difficulties we have, but hopefully that will continue. Can I just touch on, Mr. Humphrey touched on some of the questions have been answered in tourism,
yeah,
in relation to the events, and I do welcome that the major events are being honoured going forward for the next number of years as well. But touching, Minister, on the smaller events, these smaller events are the lifeline of a lot of our economy throughout Northern Ireland in relation to, has been touched on through the local councils and such like, and through the hospitality industry. If the smaller events were to suffer in any way, how do you see that going forward in relation to the, let's say, in the hospitality industry and such likes, and these jobs going into the future? That I think they said at the start that we had maybe with a 5% increase in trips this year, and some 22% of increased visitors from the Irish Republic. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
So, would we still continue and hope to continue or improve on that going forward?
Well, I'm a great supporter of events in terms of driving the tourism market, and I know that the Hotels Federation and the other parts of the industry would agree with that. In terms of international visitors, they tend to come, if they come at all for events, they will come for the larger events, and those events are continuing to occur. I would say that the smaller events, the community events, and not universally, and some of them do attract international visitors, but in the main, I would say that the smaller events would be for the domestic market, and maybe some of the border regions as well would attend that. So it is a domestic occurrence. But you know, the smaller events and the way in which they've grown, and the fact that we have had to try and grow the events fund organically, because when the events fund came to us from DCAL, was that 2008, I think, 2009, the events fund came over to us from DCAL. It had a fixed budget, and we have tried to grow that budget every year through the monitoring round, which and we've talked about that facility and the way in which we've had to do that over the years. And that's because when it came to us, it was just £1 million, and that's the way it was. And we have grown that over a period of time because we've recognised the need to have those number of events. Now, it is with great regret that I had to make that announcement, that we didn't have the funding to deal with. And can I say, when I say it, the events fund, that events fund of £1 million covered the international events and every other event. It was just £1 million for everything. And so you can see the way in which we've grown it. I certainly would like in 14-15, if we can at all, to do an events fund for those smaller events. It'll be a challenge to do it, but it's something I think would send out a message that we are very much valuing the work that goes on at grassroots level, and we want to take it forward. But it is a competitive process. Not everybody's going to get money out of it, but I just think it would send a signal of the value that I put on events right across Northern Ireland.
Yeah, thank you, Minister, for that. It is encouraging that we do attempt to, and say down in the community, I do know of connections that's being made that attract.
I have to say as well, I will support events companies trying to approach the private sector as well for funding. Sometimes, and again, I'm not casting aspersions on any organisation, it is comfortable to get money every year from government. And I'm not saying it's easy, because there are forms to fill in and everything else, but you know that every year you can apply in and what have you. I think sometimes we have to be creative about where we can access the funding, and certainly I would encourage them to have other sources of funding as well. I'm not asking them to rely on the promise of an events fund this year, because even if it does come out, I don't think we're going to be able to accommodate all those who would have wanted to have been accommodated.
Can I ask a topical question?
A topical question?
It hasn't been asked today. Is corporation tax, as we move forward, if those powers asked us and to the Minister of Finance in the Chamber yesterday in relation to the corporation tax powers being devolved, how do you see that going forward?
Well, we await a decision from the Prime Minister. We know that we don't have too much longer to wait on that decision, that it will come, if it does at all, in the autumn statement, which bizarrely is at the beginning of December, and we will hear from him whether we achieve corporation tax. And if we do, and gain the power to lower the rate, then I think that will send out a very positive message to the rest of the world. Invest Northern Ireland will immediately, despite the fact that it will not immediately happen, the tax cut rate cut, but we will immediately use that as a way of going to some firms that haven't been interested in the past and trying to attract them into Northern Ireland. So we await hearing. We hope that it will be a positive outcome, and then we will move forward into trying to attract those firms into Northern Ireland.
And finally, where we are at the moment with financial pressures, are you confident, Minister, that as we go forward, that those jobs, and with maybe corporation tax being given to the default administration, that we can look forward with confidence going into the future?
Well, I mean, I'm very confident, and all the indicators are that the economy will continue to grow. Let's be very clear. My job is to facilitate economic growth. It's the businesses on the ground that actually make that happen. We want to send out a confident message to them that we are trying to facilitate their growth, whether that's through financial assistance, which we have in the past been able to achieve, or it may be through assistance to apply into European funding for research and development monies, or it may be to try and deal with the issue of business regulation, business red tape. We do need to send out a message to the business community in Northern Ireland that we, and this may be counterintuitive, we are the government and we want to help you, but certainly we do want to try and assist companies to grow, because we do recognise that the businesses, small and large, are the people that drive the economy in Northern Ireland.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Arlene, one of the comments you made there was about businesses that haven't been interested in locating here previously.
Yes.
Has any kind of work been done by Invest or anybody else to find out reasons why companies that Invest and I have been pitching at have decided not to base themselves here?
Well, principally it's because of the tax regime, and they, Invest, have indicated to me, and the international team, particularly in America, have said that there are just some companies that they wouldn't even approach because the first question would be in and around tax. Therefore, if we are able to have the corporation rate cut and the power to bring it down, then they will be able to engage with those firms. So I think it opens up a whole new range of people who we could go
But I was
conversation with.
talking more about businesses that Invest had actually engaged with, that were thinking about operating or opening a European base, for example, and decided to go somewhere else. You know, was there any empirical evidence as to why they chose not to base themselves here? Because during the inquiry we did into the cost of energy, the CBI told us that there were a number of projects that were lost here because of the price of energy, but Invest and I and yourself challenged that.
Well, I haven't received any information either from the CBI or indeed from other companies that the cost of energy was the principal reason why they didn't come and invest here. There would be many and varied reasons why people may have us on the short list and may decide to go elsewhere. Just as we win out on occasions against other regions, we will lose out on occasions.
But what I'm
regions.
trying to find out is there. There's
no
no empirical data to give you an overview.
Well,
of
there would be very particular circumstances to that firm. You couldn't extrapolate from one firm to another firm to another firm. And if you're asking me, as I think you are energy costs a running thread throughout that? And no, the answer is no.
No, I wasn't actually focusing on energy costs. I was looking to see what the main issues on where we actually miss out are.
As I understand it, and I presume this is something that you could raise with Alistair Hamilton when he's in front of you as well, that there are many and different reasons. There's no particular reason as to why people don't come to Northern Ireland.
Chris?
I mean, it's a range of issues.
Thanks, Chair, and apologies I had to pop out for education statement, but and again, so if this is touched upon already, apologies, but just wondering, Minister, given our sort of patchy economic recovery and very inconsistent in places, is it time to review Invest? Is that something the Department has plans to do, to look at the strengths and weaknesses of Invest and maybe to benchmark it against the likes of Scottish Enterprise or Enterprise Ireland? Is that work that's already been done?
Well, first of all, they are benchmarked against all of the other regional development agencies and country development agencies, and they come out very, very well, and I'm sure Alistair will tell you about that next week. Secondly, I carried out a review on Invest in Northern Ireland in 2009. As you know, I periodically review the arm's length bodies. We've had the Consumer Council, Invest Northern Ireland, Tourist Board. The only one that hasn't been looked at is the Health and Safety Executive, and if I feel there's a need to do that, I will do that. In fact, I had a discussion with the Chief Executive just yesterday from the Health and Safety Executive about the issues. So I don't think it's time to look again at Invest as yet. The independent review of economic policy was a very fundamental review. It led to organisational change in Invest Northern Ireland. That has all now been worked through. I think it's as wise to allow that to settle down. But if you're asking me about benchmarking, then I think you'll find that Alistair, coming from the private sector, has benchmarked Invest Northern Ireland against a lot of different metrics, and he'll be able to talk to you about that when he comes to see you.
Thanks. Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair, Deputy Chair. Minister, you have to be, I suppose, your department has to be the most agile of all departments in this place, because you're the front-facing department to business, and you have to try and be as agile as business is. So I would suspect that in your monitoring rounds have been very important to you over the past number of years, particularly in the downturn. Given the restrictions and the pressure on budgets, do you see that becoming increasingly more important as your machine with job creation and job promotion has cranked up over the last number of years to a point where you've built up a head of speed or steam? To me, it would be a real crime and shame if you were to lose out, or your department was to lose out at this time when we need growth and we need stability and we need things to grow. How important are in your monitoring rounds to you, and how important will they be going forward?
Well, certainly the monitoring rounds have been hugely important at a time when Invest, and we know there are reasons for this, particularly around the SFA rules at the end of June, that they had to deal with all of those pressures coming up to the end of June and make sure that the announcements were made and that the jobs were secured. So there definitely was a head of steam up until the end of June to deal with those pressures. And to a certain extent, they've been a victim of their own success. They have created and brought in a wide range of companies right across Northern Ireland. And as a result of that, there is a growing pressure on their budget. What I will have to do is to advocate on their behalf at executive level as to why we should continue to support Invest Northern Ireland, continue to support job creation, and as I've said, thus far, executive colleagues have been very supportive of that. Now, given that there are a lot of pressures right across government, I may find it more and more challenging to argue that, but I'm hopeful that if I bring a good project to the executive table that I need funding for, that they will listen to it very sympathetically.
Okay, thank you. With regards to, and you'll expect me to raise the Northern Ireland Open Challenge Tour competition in Galgorm, a very, very good, prestigious and well-run competition. Golf tournament. Well, you'll know all about it too.
It's funny you didn't know the name of it there 5 minutes ago. I had to correct you actually, Paul. Put it in the record there.
If we are trying to attract again the Irish Open, and if we are aspiring to have the Open here, how important is a competition, albeit on a different site, a different golf course, and albeit on a different challenge tour, or a different competition or stream, or a different level, how important is it that we support the Open Challenge Tour in Galgorm in order to show the world that we are ready and able and willing to host the Open?
Well, the Northern Ireland Open Challenge is a very good competition, and more than that, it's become a very good tourist initiative as well. I had the pleasure of being up at it at the end of August this year, and it had grown from the previous year insofar as there was a food village, there were a lot of stands, people were coming in not just for the golf but for the food experience and just the whole ambience of being in the Galgorm Castle ground. So it's a very good example of how you can start something and then grow it organically every year, and I think it adds to our golf offering. We have the Challenge Tour, as you rightly say, and then we have the Irish Open, and then we want to bring the Open back to Northern Ireland, and we have committed to doing that, and that's very exciting for us because golf tourists spend more money than any other tourist than when they come to Northern Ireland, and that's significant because, as you know, not only do we have targets in terms of the number of tourists, but we have targets in terms of the spend as well. So we want to make it a £1 billion industry by 2020, and it's by encouraging those high-spending tourists to come to Northern Ireland that we'll achieve that goal.
Some of the members here today have raised the issue of regional disparity. Again, I have my own views on that, and when you go on a global market to attract companies to Northern Ireland, you're not going to pick a patch of field and say we'd like you to go there. You're going to let them go where they want to go within Northern Ireland. And the days where we could expect employment at the end of our street left with the linen industry and the mills in our villages and our towns. Whilst we know the service industry will go to Belfast, capital city, and we'll know that manufacturing and construction will go outside of the capital city, what discussions do you have with your counterparts in the executive? Let's say, for instance, DRD around road infrastructure, park and ride schemes, so that when people do commute to work, which is inevitable these days, that they are supported as best they can, and that commute becomes much less pressurised and lighter in order that people can fit their employment into their working day and to their lives?
Well, I mean, I think what you're referencing is the fact that whilst I hold the economic brief in the executive, it goes much, much wider than that. And that was, the recognition was there in terms of the subcommittee of the executive on the economy. And the DRD minister sits on that subcommittee, and because he will make decisions which will have an implication for the economy of Northern Ireland, and indeed most ministers, when they make decisions, it will have an implication for the economy. So whilst I haven't had any conversations with him around park and ride schemes and the need for them in various areas, that's a matter for him to consider in consultation with his officials. I do very much recognise that economic development in Northern Ireland is something for the entire executive, and given that it's the #1 priority in the programme for government, it so should be.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
All right, that's it.
Should I? Okay.
It's a bit scary.
Is that a memo to Gregory?
All right.
Irish language is available
Yes.
in Arlington.
All right.
All the best.
Thank you.
Did you slip in there?
You're slipping.
I think I'm slipping more.
Oh, yeah.
You're getting soft.
I hear most things.
You're getting soft.
Programme. Well, that's your influence.
I've been up to him, you know,
I'm working on you, Gordon.
Take a while.
Members,
Irish language business, and we will be all right.
we'll move on to agenda item number 5, which is an oral briefing from NISTA and Action Renewables on the impact of changes to the renewable obligation on the solar PV industry. Members, papers for this are at page 15 in your packet and include a briefing paper from Action Renewables, Action Renewables' response to the DEDI consultation, the Assembly research paper concerning changes to the renewables obligation, correspondence from Salis Renewables, briefing papers from NISTA, which is at page 11. So, briefing the committee today is Michael Dorn, Jonathan Buick, Neil O'Brien, Andrew Baird and Trevor Finlay.
Vice Chair, is it okay if I go first on my own on behalf of Action Renewables and let NIST do their own presentation?
I'll do two separate.
Okay.
What about the questions, Michael? Can you all do the questions together, though?
Whichever way you want, I can take
I
them
think if we did one
individually or at
section,
the
because
end.
I apologise we've kept it late.
That's
but I
fine.
think if you want to give your presentation first, then we'll bring the other gentlemen up to do their presentation, then maybe you can all field the questions together. Are you comfortable with that?
That's fine.
Grand job, Michael. Go on ahead.
Fine. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. My presentation won't take more than about 7 or 8 minutes. As you're aware, DETI released a consultation document several months ago on proposed changes to the Northern Ireland renewable obligation. The essence of those changes were focused mostly on PV, There was virtually no change to any other of the support levels. But the proposed change was to take PV, photovoltaic, down from 4 ROCs down to 1.6. The purpose of my presentation today is to try and get over that we believe that'll be catastrophic, not just detrimental, but catastrophic for the industry within Northern Ireland. And I want to take about 5 or 6 minutes to explain why. You've already got a paper from Action Renewables which highlighted what we considered were 9 salient points to take into consideration. I'm going to focus on 5 of those today. The first one is on the relative position of PV within Northern Ireland compared to the rest of the UK. The second one is what the impact will have on people within Northern Ireland, particularly the fuel poor. Next one's on potential job losses, and also about how it affects the Northern Ireland budget if that was not enacted, if it was not brought down from 4 to 1.6. So we're going to take a few minutes to run through those. First of all, Northern Ireland has an installed capacity of about 26 megawatts. So if you add together the total generating capacity of all of the PV panels, we've got about 26 megawatts operating in Northern Ireland. That's in comparison to 4,800 megawatts in the whole of the UK. So we account for about 0.5% of the total UK market. So already we're at about a fifth of the generation capacity of the rest of the UK in terms of pro rata. So it's not as though we have bounded ahead of the market. In comparison to the rest of the UK, we're actually way behind the rest of the market. And reducing from 4 to 1.6 is going to kill it off completely. Reducing from 4 to 1.6, we think, will completely stop the market. There are 2 aspects to the market, and Nista will probably explain this to you in more detail later on. Action Renewables guess that about half of the market is what's called free solar or free PV, which is where the installation is funded by another company. It doesn't actually cost the person who's putting it on the roof anything. Those tend to be in the people who don't have the money to fund it themselves. So the free PV will stop dead in the market, so the people who tend to be in fuel poverty will be the ones who are affected most by this. Our opinion is it's only people who have lots of spare cash that will continue to put in the PV. So it's going to affect the fuel poor more than anybody else. We anticipated the job losses, the direct job losses in Northern Ireland, if it's reduced from 4 to 1.6, will be about 500 jobs. On top of that, there will be other attendant industries like roofers and electricians, but there'll be a direct job loss of about 500. The thing you've got to bear in mind, the funding for the ROCs payments does not come out of the block grant. So if it was maintained at the current level of 4 instead of reducing it to 1.6, it doesn't have an adverse effect on the other budgetary constraints which you were considering yesterday and which are obviously ongoing. The last thing is a more notional idea, and it's about the effect that we think that PV has on raising the awareness of renewables within Northern Ireland. Action Renewables' main objective is to see as much deployment of renewables in Northern Ireland as possible. PV is one of the most visual, and it's the one that most people can buy into most easily. So at the moment there are about 8,500 houses already have it. When those people get involved, it's not just the fact that they're saving themselves money by having a PV panel on the roof and generating their own electricity, but they buy into the notion that they're contributing towards solving the problem. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. Jonathan, Neil, Andrew and Trevor want to come forward now?
We thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the committee for the invitation this morning. We also very grateful to Michael for what has been the appropriate synopsis, which we have no intention of mirroring. There are, however, some points that we would, on behalf of NISTA, like to make. If I could, by way of introduction, say that NISTA is a young organisation only formed in the spring of this year. It represents the interests of the solar industry in Northern Ireland. And even in such a short time, we have been very fortunate that the industry has been galvanised, and I'd say that our membership would represent in excess of 90% of the industry. I am Neil O'Brien, the chairman, obviously representing the organisation, but my day job is as the chairman of Amber Green Energy, which is one of the leading energy companies in Northern Ireland in this particular microgeneration sphere. On my left is Trevor Finlay, who is well known in the financial services sector. He leads the Galgorm organisation, which is one of the firms offering the funded or the free model of solar panel installation. And on my right is Andy Baird. Andy would be recognised as the foremost authority on solar photovoltaic in Northern Ireland, if not the UK, and has over a decade of experience in project work in Northern Ireland and in England as well. We'd like to recognise the work done by the department and also by the members of the EDI committee in the promotion and the supporting of the renewable sector over recent times and years. And we know that you will know a little about the recent growth that we have experienced in Northern Ireland and the success we've had in building some of the infrastructure for microgeneration, which has, we believe, has yielded over 1,000 jobs in the sector, both direct and indirect, and also at the current rate is investing over £20 million per year in that infrastructure in Northern Ireland, which is helping to address both the need for better energy sources and cleaner energy sources, but also the fuel poverty issue and the reduction in CO2. We're here obviously to discuss with you the impact that the reduction that is proposed would have on our sector. And catastrophic was the word that Michael used. We would share that. We would, however, say that by our estimates, if this reduction was to be introduced in April of next year, it would lead to 80 to 90% of our industry evaporating overnight. And that would obviously end the job creation that we have enjoyed with obviously your support and others. But it would also end the accessibility of many, many thousands of people to become their own micro-generating power station. And that itself is a serious potential travesty. Also, we believe that the preserve, which is the solar PV, would really come about only for large organisations and public bodies, because they would be the only people who could undertake the capital expenditure required if there was not the level of support. Now, Michael has covered off the comparative analysis. Our own figures are one where we believe our industry in the next 2 years could double or perhaps triple in size. We are, as Michael has said, approximately 400% behind a comparative benchmark for the rest of GB. We believe absolutely that a reduction in the support levels would be perhaps not just very unwise, but would create tremendous damage to the Northern Ireland national interest, if I may call it that. And whilst we have 1% of the installed PV generation in the UK, we obviously are of such a micro size that only represents 0.5% of the power that's been generated from solar sources in the UK. I would perhaps close our comments by saying that we recognise the EDI commitment in relation to job creation in Northern Ireland, but also in the protection of the consumer and entrepreneurship. On the consumer side, the solar panel PV market is one of the very, very few, if only, ways that the small homeowner, the small business owner and mid-sized can access electricity generation. They can't normally access the hillsides or the tidal estuaries to put up their wind turbines or their tidal wave energy. It is a very accessible thing, and the support framework has brought that around. Also, it is something, as we listened to you this morning in your previous discourse, of all the industries that I can think of that has some of the attributes that you're seeking in relation to enterprise in Northern Ireland. The creativity, the innovation, the indigenous aspect, that is the domestic solar PV industry, it seems to have all the hallmarks of what you as a committee are looking for the betterment of our society and our generation and wealth creation. I'd say 50 to 60% of what we do as Northern Ireland companies is value add in this jurisdiction. Surely we don't make our own panels, but apart from that, we pretty much do everything else. And I think that the word that is catastrophic that has been used is something that would be our word for the industry if we were not to have the level of support that we currently enjoy. And I close by saying that it is our proposal that the current support levels are continued for at least a further 12 months, ideally 18 months, which would give us the opportunity of having an informed and well-balanced projection of the information within the sector, which would allow both DETI and this committee and others to appreciate fully how any proposed reduction in support could come about, but yet protect the fledgling and blossoming industry that we are part of. And on that, we welcome your questions.
Okay. Thanks for your presentations. I suppose that the first point to make is that we've all had representations from people that are employed and reliant on the sector for a livelihood, and we're very cognizant of the fact that this may well impact on people's abilities to earn a living. So we have to take that into account. Michael, I want to pick up on your point that this subsidy doesn't affect the budget because it's paid for from elsewhere, but it's paid for from the electricity bills of customers.
That's correct.
What sort of an impact are you talking about on the unit price of electricity if this reduction is made?
Approximately 3p per household in the UK.
Over what period of time?
Per annum.
Okay. Is that just for to
support what's happening in
the solar
Northern
PV?
Ireland? Yep.
Okay. Can you tell me more about how ROC trading agreements work?
Okay.
What they are?
Right. I'll try and shorten this because this could go on quite a long time. ROCs are a tradable item.
Okay.
So when a generator, a small generator, generates electricity under the current system in Northern Ireland, they're given ROCs, which are certificates, renewable obligation certificates. The larger generators have an obligation to generate a certain level of electricity from renewable sources. If they don't have the capacity to do that, so for instance the generators, some of the generators in Northern Ireland, like Ballylongford, are not using renewable sources, there's an obligation on them to go to the market to buy the certificates. So it is as though they were generating. If you've got a small generator who's generating renewable electricity, he gets a certificate. He can trade that to a larger generator who doesn't have the capability to generate renewable electricity. That larger generator can then take the certificate at the end of the year and trade it in. So instead of him being fined for not generating renewable electricity, he basically gets a pat on the back for having the certificates to trade in. So there is a market within the UK which is driven by the difference between the generating capacity and the obligation. So basically the government sits down every year and works out what is the capacity of the total industry to generate renewable electricity. It then sets the target higher than that. And it's the difference, it's what's called headroom market. It's the difference between those which creates the value of the certificate. If the obligation was only the same as the capacity in the market to generate, then there would be no requirement for the larger generators to go looking for the certificates. But because they can't generate enough on their own, they have to look around the market to purchase the certificates.
And how much are they bought for?
Typically, they're a tradable, so they've got a variable value. At the moment, they're typically about £42 per ROC, which is about 4.2p per kilowatt.
And what would happen if the larger generators actually started to use renewable energy and there was no requirement on them to purchase ROCs from the smaller generators?
Then the entire ROC system would fall apart. So there would be it wouldn't be an effective system. So every year, the UK government, DEC, has to sit down and work out what's the capacity within the country to generate, and then it sets the target higher than the capacity. And it's that difference which creates a value within the market.
Okay. In terms of the the current rate of incentivisation and the proposed one. Is the current one 16.96p a unit?
About that, yeah.
And
it depends on the value of the rock. So if it's 4.2p per kilowatt, it's 4 times 4.2, which is about 16.8, 16.9.
So it's actually been incentivised to the current cost of a price of electricity to a domestic customer?
That's correct.
In the long term, how does that make financial sense?
In the long term, it doesn't. If you don't have an incentive in the market, then nobody's going to change. So if there wasn't a renewables obligation system within the UK, all of the existing power producers would continue to use the cheapest form of energy, which would be fossil fuels, and there would be no shift in the market.
But you're talking about giving people here a subsidy of 17p on every unit of electricity generated for the next 15, 20 or 25 years. How does that make sense?
Because it incentivises people to move. Otherwise, natural behaviour, nobody's going to change their behavioural pattern. If it's going to cost you £4,000 or £5,000 to put in 3 kilowatts onto your roof, and you're only going to get the payback over 15 or 20 years, most people, unless they're relatively well off, just say, look, I'm just going to sit the way I am. There's no incentive to move. If there's an incentive to move, then initially they're driven by the value of that, which encourages them to move. That was my last point in the presentation. When people then start to realise that they're actually generating their own renewable electricity, they start to think about the situation that we're in, which is that we've got to move to renewables. So there's a buy-in to where the system's going.
And in terms of that difference between less well-off households that would certainly never make that change and households that could afford to do it, is there any change in other government policies that's required to encourage less well-off people to invest in these schemes apart from the ROC scheme?
No, one of the things I should have mentioned is, for instance, the housing executive. I'm not here representing the housing executive today, but I'm led to believe they will stop all of the PV systems that they're putting on the roof because it won't stack up within their own internal auditing. The housing associations won't consider going ahead with PV systems. So basically, the people who can benefit most from it won't have the opportunity because the funders aren't able to substantiate an 18 or a 20-year payback.
Okay. Gordon?
Thanks, Chair. You're welcome. And we value your contribution to the debate. You did mention there in relation to the cost to consumers. It's about 3.7p per annum. Is there a risk of that increasing if we continue to move on the PV infrastructure?
No. Incrementally, it might go up from 2.9 to 3, but it's minimal. It's a very, very small amount.
But the SEPA report would say that there is a risk because as you continue the PV installations, there will be an increase to the consumer, to the average consumer, and therefore it may have a negative effect.
No, there will be an increase, but it might go from 2.9 to 3p. What Neil was talking about earlier on, we appreciate that the current incentivisation can't continue forevermore. But bringing it in April of next year is going to get dead in its tracks. And they'll be talking later on. There's an issue at the moment is that most people perceive that the market's going to come to an end in April. So there's now a mad rush to get as many in before April as possible. If the industry fails in Northern Ireland, you're going to be left with the installers will cease to operate. So if there are subsequently operation and maintenance issues afterwards, there'll be no installers left. We appreciate that over time the incentives have to come down, but not from 4 to 1.6 in April of next year.
Moving on to the cost of panels. It's our understanding that since 2010 the panels have dropped significantly in cost. Is that the case?
Yeah. Could I maybe bat it back to NISTA? They have more knowledge of the market than I do.
You're very kind, Michael. Thank you to Mr. Dunn. The price of panels has indeed fallen. The industry here really only got going in 2012 when we first received the SEPA report in July of this year, and we looked at the figures. It became very apparent to us that using the data set from 2010 as opposed to 2012 was exaggerating the decrease in the cost of the technical side of a solar installation. So certainly there has been a very welcome steadying up and falling of the prices of the kit itself. That has now stabilised and has been very stable for the last number of months. The backdrop, however, that SEPA did not actually drill into was that whilst the price of the kit has been falling steadily from 2010 to 2012 and then from 2012 to now as we have been growing the industry, the price of everything else has been rising, and certainly given the installation teams and the technicians that are required to install these panels, there was a dearth of work for roofers and for electricians over that period. We have seen a doubling in some of their rates over the period because these workers have gone to Scotland or the south of Ireland to build homes and other things. They're very welcomely now experiencing growth in their opportunities here, but that in turn has led to increasing costs, and that backdrop has not been caught by SEPA. So I would say to you that the industry right now is experiencing a time of marginal depreciation in the price of panels, marginal gain in the outputs, but increasing costs on the price of installing and supporting and training and educating the market and getting around our customer base. And those are starkly not evident in the SEPA report. In fact, our organisation would go so far as to say that the data set is flawed, and we have presented that through various papers to DETI and others.
And most of the panels are sourced abroad, is it?
Yes, indeed they are.
Yeah, in China, I take it, yeah.
There would be a very healthy mix of panels from Europe and from Central Europe, and others then from the Far East. Much of the content of the panels is made in those economies, but there's a great deal of assembly and value add in Europe and locally. And if we were to talk in broad brush figures, it could be as low as 20% in some circumstances and as high as 50%. And then the value add is here.
Okay, thank you. Just finally, the infrastructure in relation to getting supplies into the system. Surely there are great weaknesses there, and this is one of the problems I think the department are trying to address. If we continue at the rate we're going at, there are going to be more and more issues there in relation to the upgrade of the infrastructure. How is that going to be addressed if we don't manage it in some form?
I'm sorry for the interruption. Perhaps Andy would be the best person to address that question.
It's a very good point, and if you look internationally, this whole issue of solar and grid integration is a major issue. But I have to exercise some caution in terms of how we quantify that in terms of the Northern Ireland situation. One of the unique features of all of the solar that's been deployed over Northern Ireland in the last decade, and that's the sort of time frame we're talking about in terms of building the initial foundation, it is delivering clean electricity directly at the point of use. So I have to err on the side of some suspicious caution with regard to the impact that solar is having on the grid. The reality is we have a largely centralised generation base and this one push to many grid. It's a 20th century architecture. Solar, in many respects, because of the inherent 15 to 20% distribution and transmission losses that exist in this old grid, solar has the benefit of actually balancing a lot of that. So the small amount of energy that isn't actually used within the dwelling, within the property, travels very locally, essentially next door, down through the same cable. So we need to be very cautious about overstating the costs of accommodating solar, not least within the next 2 to 3 years. The whole storage architecture is going to come online. So think of storage today like solar 5 years ago. There was a certain amount of it going on, but it was prohibitively expensive. That is changing dramatically. We have 4,000 domestic solar storage systems installed and integrated with the grid in Germany. They will drive down the price, and I think a lot of the concern will simply evaporate within the next 2 to 3 years as those early adopters of solar further innovate with what they've already invested in to minimise export and store the electricity that their systems are producing.
Who pays for all of that?
Well, that would be, unless there was a mechanism, and in Germany there is a €2,000 capital grant available, but they are the early adopters. My gut feeling is, with the right level of support to enable this industry to mature over the next couple of years, it potentially simply become a capital purchase by the customer without any obvious need for subsidy support.
If I could boldly interject there, to the Chair, Mr. Dunn, the creativity and the innovation around this particular sector, we as an organisation that represents the sector believes that within 4 to 5 years, some of these issues will actually have evaporated. If I go to the price, which the Chairman brought earlier, at 16.9 pence, that on the 1st of October fell to 16.3 pence, and we would anticipate over the next 4, 5, 6 years that that would decrease even further, with electricity prices potentially increasing, with opportunities for storage increasing and the better use of the energy that is created. Then there will be natural efficiencies and a narrowing of that support gap, if you will, or surplus. And we would also say that the reason why we are proposing a 12 to 18 month no change on the support levels is that we as the industry would love a debate as to how we would fund the capital, either through capital allowances or small grants, and even things like waste reductions on buildings that are more efficient, the full plethora of things that would actually claw back some of the capital that is required and make it a much more innovative way of funding what is modest capex for the homeowner. It is, is obviously larger for the business person, and that is why we're seeking these proposals to reduce this ROC to be put off, to allow those things to happen, that debate to happen.
Okay, thanks very much, gentlemen. Thanks, Chair.
Paul. Thank you, Chair. I have certain sympathy for you and the industry. I'm a spark with trade, so I know how big a value this has been to the industry this last couple of years. I know a lot of electricians that have went into this side of the industry. But the industry has come under increasing criticism of the last while around the door-to-door techniques and the information given to householders regarding the leasing of their roofs. How would you counter that criticism?
Do you want that one?
Yeah, well, as a free solar developer myself, we've installed probably 750 plus systems across Northern Ireland. In total, we estimate that around 2,500 systems have been installed on a free of charge basis to consumers and also businesses who recognise the value in having solar panels installed on their premises. We, speaking from myself, perspective, have got one customer at the moment out of that 750 that's not happy. Okay, we have a very high level of customer support. We've had difficulties through some of the banks who have mortgages over properties not consenting to having panels on roofs of mortgaged property. That's something that we as an industry continue to try and deal with directly with those financial institutions that take that stance. However, many other financial institutions take the opposite stance and wholly embrace the idea of the homeowner being able to have a renewable energy generator on their roof. With regard to the specifics, Mr. Frew of door-to-door salesman, the different companies that offer the free option have widely canvassed the general population through trade shows and seminars in hotels and that sort of thing. There is also, however, an element of door-to-door salesmanship going on. However, we're very conscious that we're dealing with consumers. We follow the Consumer Code very, very closely, and where there has been complaints, those complaints have been addressed properly and in line with best practice. All of our paperwork and documentation fits the standards set by the Council for Mortgage Lenders, and we give everyone a cooling off period even after they've signed the paperwork. They've got 7 to 10 day, in fact sometimes more than that, period where they can cool off and cancel their arrangement. So really the people that have had probably been raising the issues with regard to this are a very, very small minority who maybe in hindsight, having had their panels installed, wish they hadn't.
It seems to be there's two modes or methods of installation here. One which is commonly used here today is the free PV, and then one where the applicant or the householder or business can go and pay for it up front, pay for the installation, and then get the ROC themselves. Where does the ROC go in the free PV?
So as free solar developers, we take a lease over a property's roof for 20 years, and we undertake to install, maintain, operate and ensure keep that apparatus in good working order for a 20-year period. In return, the development company, the developers, will process the ROCs and take advantage of those ROCs for that 20-year period, and the building owner gets advantage of all the free electricity that those panels generate.
But if you're a householder and you and your wife works and your kids are out during the day at school, the 4 kilowatt peak won't really be of any use to you, but yet you've also lost the ROC.
So all of these aspects of the free solar option are explained to householders at the point whenever the conversations are happening, and it's quite true that in that situation it probably, the free option wouldn't be a sensible option for that particular household. However, for every householder like that, there's many people maybe approaching retirement where they're spending more time at home and using daytime electricity, where 4 kilowatts of solar PV can be saving them up to £350 a year, depending on their daytime usage. And that's the sort of, hard cash level of support that a free solar customer is able to take advantage of, and it's not to be sniffed at as a figure.
If the free PV side of things is lauded up as some sort of fix for the people in fuel poverty, why is it the case? Does it seem to be the case that the door-to-door salesmen have targeted private housing developments and not what you would class as housing executive areas, housing association areas?
I would say that the free solar option isn't just for those that are in fuel poverty. It's an option for those who wish to take advantage of renewable electricity on their roof, but who, for one reason or another, don't want to pay for that up front. So
you can see, from what I can hear from both inside and outside of industry, that there is a growing resentment in the industry and even in government circles around the free PV and the methods for which they sell, and the fact that the householder does not benefit from the ROC. And that may be one of the reasons why government would be keen to look at the ROC. How do you counter that?
So, if we compare ourselves to the rest of the UK, to GB, okay, we are so far behind the rest of the UK that it's even hard to quantify. Okay, so free solar PV has been a huge success in GB. Okay, we're only dipping our toes in the water here in terms of the quantity of systems that have been delivered to date. It gives people choice, and that's the important thing here. It gives people choice over whether or not they put their hand in their pocket and pay £5,000 or £6,000 for a system. And it's not just people that are in fuel poverty that necessarily can't afford £5,000 or £6,000. It's many, many types of people who may decide, look, I want to do my bit for CO2 reduction here, but you know what, if you're offering it to me free of charge, you know, that's the best option for me. So we have lots of people retired, people, private homes, we've lots of people in housing estates, private developments, and really we're only getting to the point now where housing associations, housing executive, and probably those people who are in real fuel poverty are getting the opportunity to take advantage of solar PV. And I fear that if these proposals are adopted on the 1st of April, none of that will happen. The recent tender from the Department of Education to put solar PV in the roofs of schools, the economic argument for doing that will evaporate on the 1st of April. You know, that £10 million that was allocated by the Department of Education to put renewables into our education properties, the case will evaporate if this reduction in ROCs is adopted on the 1st of April.
But the free PV, you say that free PV is hugely successful, but it's hugely successful for the businesses that have the ROCs, not for the householder.
So what I would suggest...
And then that's why government looks at these things with less favour.
I would suggest that as a businessman, as someone who is trying to bring investment to Northern Ireland, okay, there's plenty of competition for that investment. That investment, you know, wasn't coming to Northern Ireland until the rules changed in England a couple of years ago, when some of the capital became freed up. That capital will go elsewhere. We've brought £20 million of investment to Northern Ireland and put it into free PV systems. I can double that next year and double it the year after if things remain as is. That money will go elsewhere. That money will go to build solar farms in India if we don't take it. So there is capital available that we can bring into the sector, and it doesn't matter whether you're Phoenix Gas putting pipes in the ground. There's private capital needed to build infrastructure here in Northern Ireland, and solar PV is one little area which we can do a good job on if we're given the opportunity and with the support of government.
But I'd put it to you that the ROCs at the minute from free PV could well be going to finance solar panels in India.
Sorry, I missed your point.
You say that the best way of assuring that a ROC stays within Northern Ireland is to give it to the householder.
If that householder has got the ability to pay for those panels, absolutely.
But if solar panel is going to pay for itself within a number of years, surely that is a business proposition for anyone to measure up, to go to the bank with. And it's far better those householders going to the bank with a business proposition like that rather than a lease of a roof.
Let me put it in a different way, okay? There's 50 to 60 men, some of which are represented behind me here, depending on the capital that we're bringing to this sector for their livelihood, okay? Not everyone can afford these things. And to be honest, people will put their money into an ISA before they put them into solar panels if the 1.6 ROC recommendation is adopted. Okay? So, you know, if we're going to be creating employment in this country and we're going to be supporting trades like electricians and roofers and those sorts of things, you know, the capital that we're able to attract and bring to Northern Ireland from big pots of money in London and elsewhere, you know, is dependent on the relevant incentives. There wouldn't be a wind turbine blowing in this country if it wasn't private capital. There wouldn't be an anaerobic digester, you know, turning in this country if there wasn't private capital behind these things. People are looking for a return on their money. If we reduce that return down to something derisory, you know, the money will go elsewhere.
But out of all the entities and the companies within Northern Ireland who will operate and install these, how many use the free PV system, and how many would exist without free PV system?
They would all exist to an extent,
yeah.
Okay, but it would be half of what is currently happening.
Okay.
If I may interject for a moment, and please forgive me if I've broken protocol there, but to assist the questioning, which has real integrity, and we respect and appreciate that. As an industry, there are 3 or 4 very significant players in Northern Ireland that are offering the funded model. And I would stress here that NISTA is a broad church. You know, there are over 100 installers in Northern Ireland, and only a small proportion of them are able to offer what is a very welcome choice in the marketplace to fund panels. And some are very pro that choice, others are not. But it is welcome nevertheless because it has been making an impact. If I could perhaps soften slightly the delivery from Trevor, I would say that as part of the education process that goes from the installer to the home owner, we do encourage people to take a look at their energy use, of course. And we say to them, run your dishwasher, your tumble dryer, various things during the middle of the day, and therefore make the maximum impact on your bill reduction. And some people who have got the free solar installs are experiencing over 50% of a reduction in their energy bill. It is very substantive, and whilst they may be out of the home, with a little more education and awareness, they can certainly make use of much of the energy that they are producing. I'd also say to you that the benefit that some would argue that the free solar model has had is that it has helped to reduce the capital prices across the board. It has introduced more competition. It has sharpened the pencils of those installers that are not offering. And certainly, as one of the leading companies that has not been offering free solar, Amber Green has had to sharpen its pencil and offer even enhanced value equations to thousands of customers in Northern Ireland. And they have been very welcome competition. Albeit, as I said, the NIST organisation is a very broad church. But we certainly respect the questions there. I would counsel from NIST that it is perhaps a softer impact than those in the media or others would present. And whilst there have been some high-profile instances where people feel they have not had the positive experience in the selling process, there have been many, many thousands who...
Final questions. Chair, I have something for you with regards to a large drop in ROC. But does that merely suggest that it's been overfinanced to date?
No. The SEPA report really focuses on this issue. Where I take issue with SEPA, that's rehashed data that was used to influence the proposed cut to feed-in tariffs in England, Scotland and Wales. Cuts that ultimately ended up at the Supreme Court, were found to be illegal, and now DEC is facing a £142 million compensation claim from the industry. So I'm very uncomfortable with some of this core data. What's interesting, and I speak as someone who, on the date these cuts come in, will have served a decade of trying to build a solar energy infrastructure in Northern Ireland. For most of those years, we were scratching around in the dirt because the economics didn't make sense. In 2010, we missed a fundamental regional opportunity for our economy when we failed to implement the feed-in tariffs. So the reality is, the growth that we've seen in 2012 to 2014, without taking advantage of these dramatic cost reductions that were primarily achieved between 2010 and 2012, surely indicate that DETI have got it absolutely right. You have now created the scenario whereby homeowners, businesses, farmers, including, as has always been the case, an element of the public sector, are now investing in solar. So no, it isn't overcompensated. You've actually got a very finely balanced economic equation spot on. And that's where I'm very confused as to why. It almost seems, as I say, speaking with a decade of experience in solar, you can only ever be too successful, because as soon as you start delivering growth, and we're talking about pence per household per year to develop 500 jobs, 20 million of investment in the regional economy per annum, surely that is something, firstly, to congratulate the industry for, and then work with us to find out how we can build on this success, because genuinely this should just be the beginning, not the end.
Chair, ask me, though it may not sound like it, gentlemen, I'm quite sympathetic to your arguments, so thank you very much for your presentation today. Thank you.
Sidney? Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation. It's already been touched on by my colleague Mr Dunn here in relation to the cost of solar panels. But I think someone mentioned that these panels can either come from China or European or locally. What's the standard of workmanship or the standard of these panels? And how do you get an average price when you cost these panels?
It's a mature technology. It hasn't changed dramatically for 50 years. Certainly in the last 5 to 10 years, there has been this massive growth in China, partly because of a low cost base, partly because they are brilliant at copying what others have developed. And I applaud them for that. I've never been comfortable with this idea that, you know, you've got your option of cheap Chinese junk or great European stuff. It just doesn't wash in terms of where the industry is at. The interesting thing is whether it's the US, across Europe, or across the Far East, most of this equipment is built on the same production lines. It's a pretty standard end-to-end process, notwithstanding...
The guarantee of these panels, they haven't been tested, really. We don't really know it's a...
Well, we do.
Do we?
3 or 4 weeks ago, the 20th anniversary of the first grid-connected solar PV system in the UK, it's its 20th anniversary. There was a specific field test of every module in that array. The average efficiency was 95% after 20 years. There was an inverter change in the mid-period, 20 years and still going strong at 95%.
Is that a local or a European one, or was that?
It's a Sharp module. Sharp used to produce in Wrexham, but...
Okay.
So could I chip in as well? There's also a quality assurance scheme which is operated within the UK called MCS, which is the Micro Generation Certification Scheme. And it operates over all of the renewable technologies, and it operates in 2 separate streams. One is the quality of the unit itself in each of the technologies, and the other is the quality of the installer. Action Renewables is an accrediting body within Northern Ireland for the installers. So Neil has already mentioned there are about 100 installers in Northern Ireland. We do accreditation for about 50 of those. So that's to ensure that the quality of the installation is up to standard. If the panels themselves have not been passed, then they can't be installed. So there is a quality assurance scheme that overlooks all of those.
And could I just add maybe to that, most panels are coming with a 25-year manufacturer's warranty. So, you know, they're probably one of the most benign and long-term warranted products.
Well, all warranties, I'm sceptical sometimes about warranties, especially when you talk about 25 years, because the companies are giving that guarantee. 25 years down the line, you have to look to and say, will they even be there? And that's another issue. But in relation to the panels themselves, if it's someone who's paying the £5,000 or £6,000 to install these, or someone who's renting the roof out, what way is the guarantee then with those panels for those people? The one that buys the solar panel, that's their sole responsibility with the guarantee. What's it responsible if the roof's rented?
So the development companies who are putting on free solar, like ourselves, we hold that guarantee as the owners of the panels until the end of the lease period, when all of those rights are passed to the householder.
That could be 20 years.
20
so it's your responsibility.
It's our responsibility. We take that.
Have we any history of the actual panels, how reliable they are up to now?
Failure rates?
Yeah, failure rates, yeah.
You know, solar is the most rigorously field-tested renewable technology in the UK. Starting in 2003 with Tony Blair's major demonstration programme, we had some benefit of that here with Lisneal College in the northwest, 5 Mile Town in the southeast. Then we had the low carbon building programme, where all of these installations were monitored. They had to achieve certain benchmarks in terms of performance. So as an industry, we're incredibly bullish because we've been audited and audited and audited. It's one of the most reliable, low maintenance renewable technologies there is, which is why you're seeing this huge growth, because homeowners are starting to realise they can generate their own electricity without planned maintenance, and it's a very simple technology to design, to install and to own.
Coming back to where they're manufactured, if I was going to install, purchase one of these solar panels, what would I put in a Chinese solar panel, or would I go for a local one? What is the costing? I'm trying to get hone this down. Is there a cheaper? It's like buying anything. Cheaper model here than, but it's not always the cheaper one is the most reliable one.
There is variations in the way a panel performs, but a panel is simply a component in a system. So you've got your, what I call a module, your panel generating DC. That's cabled into an inverter. So the gauge, the length of the cable needs to be considered. There's a huge range of choice in terms of your inverters from the US, Germany primarily, and China.
Without the panel, there's no
energy. So, no, but it's a system. It's a system. So to single out the module as a key determining factor in the performance of a system overlooks a whole range of other variables.
If I could boldly interject there, the question that you asked, Mr. Anderson, was the quality of the panel, the costing of the panel, what the difference may be. There could be a 20 or 30%.
Well, it's like everything else. If I go, I'm sure others go. If you go to buy something, you're looking for quality and you're looking for the best price for the best quality. So really what I'm trying to get at here is how do we know and what is the reliability of these panels up to now to encourage me to go for a particular panel?
There has been quite significant league table published data over the years on the various manufacturers where they're been drawing their manufacturing components from the output of the panels over X period of time. They have various charter marks that are well known inside the industry, and certainly anyone who is MCS registered, and that is, I suppose, the biggest factor in keeping the industry entirely honest is the fact that if something cannot be signed off, it will never get its subsidy, its transfer income. So the types of panels that are being used, certainly by those that are the funded scenarios, they want to make sure they have an income for 20 plus years. Therefore, they're motivated by the right thing, as you say. Will I get a return over 20 years? Can I guarantee this equipment that I haven't got the expense of rescaffolding a house, taking panels down, putting them back up again? So all of the motivations inside of the sector tend to lie on the very best quality, the very best output, and for the longevity. The German output, the Central European output has really been proven over 20 and 30 years because that is how long they've been testing and manufacturing panels. However, any of the Chinese product that has been brought into Northern Ireland by the installers that we represent would have been benchmarked against those league tables, the quality of the manufacture, the longevity, and really and truly it has been one of the most enjoyable things in the industry. Not to have to go back and replace panels. I can't remember an instance that we have had to do that unless there has been some damage being caused. But certainly panel failure, thankfully, is a non-entity, and that is because there's been rigorous testing and great standards across the industry.
Okay, Mr. McKinney just wants to come to
There's one point on that, is if you don't maybe, and I apologise for jumping in and out of the meeting. I've just had to make a number of calls and we'll have to leave again soon. And thanks, Sydney, for letting me in. But the decision or the proposal and the subsequent consultation has been predicated, I understand, on the fact that these prices are lower. Are the prices lower for panels? And is there merit in the government's argument that they're therefore lower and therefore there's the need to reduce the ROC?
It is important that we have integrity in all the things that we presented to the committee this morning. There is certainly merit that the level of support is continually looked at and measured. We welcome that annually, and certainly in GB that is analysed on a quarterly basis. What we as industry are seeking is a level of fairness, that there has been in the last couple of years plenty of a well-documented transfer of both systems and procedures and standards from GB to Northern Ireland over the size of install, how we install it, how we connect, etc. if we compare the ROC support level in Northern Ireland currently and we were to extrapolate that in GB, the ROC level would be around about 3.3, not 4, not 1.6, but circa 3.3, 3.4. So therefore, as you asked the question, is there not merit for looking at this? Absolutely. Is there merit for the industry to say, well, we'd like to be treated fairly, and if we are going to be benchmarked by a London-based consultancy, could we make that fair, please? And if their argument in the consultation had been around 3.3 or 3.5, there may not, in fact it would not have been, the level of angst and the consequences that we're projecting for the industry come April, if that had actually been the case. But you are correct, there is merit in saying prices tighten, we therefore need to make sure this is fair, and fairness is what the NIST organisation want.
Can I also chip in? Yes, prices have come down over the last 2 to 3 years. I don't anticipate that they will come down any further. And at the time before they did come down, there were no panels being installed in Northern Ireland. They're only being installed at the moment because there is a level of support. We could argue from now till 4 o'clock about what the level of support should be, but we're saying 1.6 is catastrophic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that.
That's okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks for chairing the meeting, Sydney, for everybody. David?
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for the information so far. I often say the strength and the weakness of renewables in general, but I think it applies equally to PV, is its diversity. In the papers you've provided us, you've outlined Action Renewables said 500 jobs in the industry. Nesta said 750, 1,000 direct and indirect jobs. If you were a single employer sitting here now telling us the government was about to make a decision that would cost that many jobs, there'd be outcry. There'd be front page of the newspaper in Northern Ireland. Because you're talking about 100 businesses, it almost seems too small. What is the scale of job losses? I think I've heard just talk about maybe as much as 90% of the industry going. Is that? I mean, what's that based off? I'm aware that you have commissioned economic assessments here. So, what kind of, I suppose, evidential underpinning have you to base that on?
So, if we just take the free part of the industry at the moment, that money has already evaporated from the 1st of April. Okay, in the last 18 months, my own company's brought 10 million or so. A few other companies have brought something similar. So there's 20 million in the best part of a year that will not be renewed. Okay, and I know that the teams of people that we have employed to deliver those projects will not have a job come 1st of April if the proposals as they remain are enacted. So that's just the free bit, and I think I speak for all the other free guys as well. That sector will just disappear. I'll take the investment and the jobs that go with it. So we're preparing for that, and we need some clarity very quickly as to what the reality will be come 1st of April.
If I could supplement that, the proposals came from DETI for consultation in this year. In early August of this year, the NISTA organisation came together to provide our responses to that. And one of the first things that we did was we asked all of the major players to quantify what they would do in the circumstances. And as we went round the room on that one, it became very, very clear that there were 50 here, there were 70 there were 90 on the other. And we asked then one of the leading economists, Professor Michael Smith, to take a good look during the month of August at exactly what the impact would be. What we didn't want to do, though, was to take too much time, because the responses had to be in for the end of September. So therefore, we have kept it broad, but we have kept it quite truthful, that between 500 and 1,000, we all know the size of organisations and the people that we employ, both on indirect opportunities and processes, and then directly. And we also know the experience of other players in GB who had a very similar projected as we have, but they had a real falling off the cliff in the 2012, I believe, sorry, 11, forgive me. And we know what happened there overnight. And as we ran our numbers, it was very apparent that somewhere between 500 and the 1,000 would go. I mean, I'd say to you also that just so as you understand the nature of the organisations and companies, there are many of them have a pedigree which is longer than 2 or 3 years, but most don't. And what they have been doing over the last 2 or 3 years is, as we have been successfully growing the businesses and we have been generating a surplus, we've been paying our corporation tax, our employees, our suppliers, but any surplus that has been there has by and large been invested in growing the market, educating the consumer, obviously the buildings, the vans, the technical training, the advertising, everything that we've been doing to educate it and to grow the market, it has come from surplus. And that surplus has been generated by the very good support levels that we've experienced in the sector. So thank you for that. But in comparative, we have been reinvesting those. So many of the organisations are not in a hugely cash positive position because they've been growing their business. And as we know, that first 2 or 3 years of the business cycle is probably the hardest. So we're now 2 or 3 years old. We've been investing our profits. We have grown our businesses based on the growth in the market. And at that very juncture, when we're achieving some level of maturity and also export to GB and Southern Ireland, we now are facing with the annihilation of the income and the support. So that perhaps provides a backdrop to the job losses and why those companies wouldn't be in a position to knuckle down for 12 or 18 months, continue with the employment levels, the infrastructure, etc. We're not 10 or 20 years old. So unlike other energy industries, we wouldn't weather the storm, even if we felt there was increases on the horizon inside 6, 12, 18 months.
Okay. I mean, you might have heard when the Minister was in front of us, some of my colleagues mentioned getting jobs to other regions outside Belfast. 100 employers. Geographically, how would that be spread?
They're spread all over Northern Ireland. We do MCS accreditations for approximately 50 of the companies, and while obviously most of them will be based in the Belfast, Lisburn area, they're all over Derry, Limavady, Enniskillen, Omagh, Strabane, Armagh, Newry. They're all over.
Another thing this committee has looked at in particular is research and development. Now, renewables again is a very innovative industry. How much of that is taking place in Northern Ireland in terms of the research and development of new products?
There's a lot of research and innovation around off-the-shelf technologies. Having made the investment into solar, and you're looking at Bluetooth remote control of appliances, some of the storage technology I mentioned. I mean, historically, Creative Composites in Crumlin, they still to this day manufacture the GRP tile that sits on thousands of social housing roofs across the UK, but especially in Northern Ireland. So there is a lot of innovation. Unfortunately, one of the things that constrains us as an industry is, whilst we do, in the midterm, depend on government subsidy, you have this distraction where you're actually not able to innovate and do all of those interesting things, simply because we are now entering that next spike in demand that is driven by a proposed cut. Before that, there was various sort of grant funding programs. We had NIE reducing the amount of solar allowed on a roof in February of this year. So we have this constant sort of spike drop, and that's probably a key issue in terms of limiting the innovation.
Where was it going? And yes, in terms of innovation, something else we've heard about recently that I think the committee was very keen on certainly exploring more was the idea of microgrids. And to be honest, I would sometimes characterise solar as part of the problem that solar has, as NIE considers it just a pain. To me, you know, sure they were here, they would say no, not at all. But it's a problem for them. It's providing them a lot of work. And they don't work like a commercial business. A lot of work isn't necessarily a good thing. But Microgrids, how important is the solar industry to the development of microgrids?
It's one part of it. There are already several projects looking at microgrids within Northern Ireland. Coleraine Council have already been involved in one. Lecale are looking at another one, which is work that's being done by B9 through David Surplus. So at the moment, Northern Ireland is actually quite active in developing innovation within microgrids and also attached to energy storage. So again, to take this out of the mix, there's another proposal going in at the moment, I understand, to Coleraine. Is anybody here from Coleraine area? There's another, they're considering a larger proposal at the moment to develop a microgrid in that area, and PV is part of it. It's not the biggest part of it, but it's part of it. And if you take that out of the mix, you're just strengthening the overall, you're weakening the overall proposal.
Sure. I mean, be well aware, I don't think it's any secret that I've always sought to promote the renewables industry. And an argument I always make is that it's not going to be subsidised forever. I often have to make the argument about renewables versus nuclear. Nuclear is a mature technology, we're still subsidising it to the hilt. We do need to see a trajectory of decreasing subsidy within the renewables, including PV industry. One, do you accept that? And I think certainly, Michael, you've alluded to that. And two, I suppose in terms of meeting the department halfway, because I certainly do not accept that going from 4 rocks to 1.6 rocks is a reasonable step down. I think that's, I do think it would be catastrophic. I think that term's acceptable. Can the industry meet the department part way to say that we are moving towards becoming a self-sustaining industry? We are moving towards a new term I've learned, grid parity. But we can move, but we can move slower. Is that conversation happening, and is that accepted by the industry?
If we could say to you that we as an industry understand that there needs to be movement. So the answer to that is yes. Are we engaged with the department and others in innovative ways that we could bridge the gaps? The answer is not yet, but we would love to be engaging in that over a 1 or 2 year period. No longer, because inside that time, we ourselves, as now increasingly more mature players with thousands of customers under our belts, have market intelligence that would allow us to present various strategies that would narrow that gap of support. We touched on a few earlier. There are many ways that individual homeowners could bridge that gap over a 10 or 20 year period, and we would really embrace as an industry that piece of work. And certainly by 2020, there are those amongst us, and most notably Andy, who would be pushing very strongly inside our organisation that we could by 2020 achieve their nirvana that we're looking for, which is no subsidy whatsoever. Others are reflecting on that, but certainly that is a debate worth having, and we would love to be stuck in the middle of that.
I mean, I think certainly when we next have the department in front of us making these arguments, I think, you know, if 2020 I accept is a debate to be had, but if you can say here is a trajectory of whereby if you can step out in terms of support, and we continue on our own, just the route to get there is what could be discussed. I think that would show maturity in the industry. I think it would show an industry that is not overly reliant on subsidy or not looking for subsidy, that ultimately is saying we need kick-started. But if you can do that, we can grow, create the jobs, create the clean green energy, and create employment ultimately in Northern Ireland, which is, as well as energy security, is one of the roles of this committee, is look at how we can create employment. It seems to me, and I go back to what I said before, if we Gallagher sitting here right now, before their jobs announcement, they told us what was coming and said there's something very simple, low cost, that you can do to stop these job losses. I don't think there's anyone in this committee that wouldn't have said, let's do it. And I think that's the kind of attitude we need in terms of the future of this industry.
If I could say one thing to you, just that of those hundreds of people, there are many of them are micro businesses. They are all doing it for themselves, for the most part, in their own sphere. They're extolling all the virtues of entrepreneurship. Some of them will not be here in 10 years' time. Others will have staff and factories of hundreds, if not thousands. They'll be exporting product all over the world. They'll be using the very best of what happens in Queen's and the University of Ulster. They'll be using all of that. There will be another right in the renewable sector, or 2 or 3 or 4. And we really couldn't be any more strenuous in our urging the committee to really believe us. As we listened to you this morning, obviously with the Minister, there was many of us were saying, you know, this is about jobs. We really couldn't urge any more our huge ask of you to support us in making sure that these proposals are either put off by 12 or 18 months to allow us to gather ourselves, or to join with us in understanding in a piece of work which we will contribute to, and we will obviously bear the responsibility of it, in actually showing the committee and showing DETI just where the solar PV industry in Northern Ireland can go.
And Neil, when you say gather yourselves, if we delay this decision by a year or 18 months, what does that mean?
That means that over that particular time, we may well be able to come up with solutions that, if scrutinised by the renewables team in DETI, there may be more innovative solutions to see a reduction in the direct transfer payment of support and subsidy. Perhaps not akin to 1.6, but certainly lower than where it is now, and ensuring an easy transfer and a weaning off of the industry to a certain percentage, be that 10, 20, 30%, a weaning off of that, and a redoubling of our efforts to make sure there's no job losses and we become even leaner and meaner and greener in how we deliver the growth in the sector that we know is there. There's a doubling or tripling in this sector in the next 2 to 3 years if we don't miss the opportunity now.
You finished, Stephen?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Sorry to miss the beginning. I also didn't hear what the Minister was on because of an education event. I was just fascinated listening to it all, how we didn't seem to be actually getting to the nut, which is job losses for next year, until Stephen's question came in. Should we not be trying to have 2 or 3 options, alternative routes to go at, one being worst case? What's the minimum we can get away with to keep some jobs in place and keep survival, keeping the decision for next year? And then the best case being what the Chair has just come up with. But we need to do it soon, and we need therefore your input on that, because I think my concern would be in the committee by the time we've written to Betty and got it all happening, we're still 6 months further on and we haven't actually done anything. Is there a way of having a quick set of options that come through that we can then work to and push the Minister for?
If I could be very bold, the membership and the size of our businesses is such that we can turn on a sixpence.
Good.
In comparative terms, with the greatest of respect to the arms of government and to the organisations that must and have the responsibility of actually running the country. Yeah. So, to be fair, the question, we respectfully would throw that back and say, how fast can DETI respond and the renewables energy team, because we can respond very quickly in as positive a way as we can. However, the industry itself is engaged in our own planning for 3 months, for 6 months, for 12 months. We have relations with suppliers, with our own contractual arrangements around staff and premises and vehicles and training. So our backdrop is one that we can move very quickly. But we do have commitments, and it is no good for us to be operating as of right now under both the cloud that there may not be an industry, and also we have the business folk and the consumers and homeowners saying, when can I get my install because I want to come in, and that is a double whammy for us.
Well, very much take that on board. We need to push. So thank you.
In your written briefing and earlier on, you mentioned that the Housing Executive sees no future for their schemes if this proposed change takes place. Have you been in contact directly with the Housing Executive on that issue?
Yes, I have.
And what exactly have they said?
They anticipate that there won't be any further PV going on. They can't justify it within their own regime, within their Green Book assessment.
Okay. Have you anything else to add before we close the session? Copy enough.
Mr. Chair, I think we all appreciate your contribution. I think it's but right, we do acknowledge the contribution that you're making to the local economy in job creation and the establishment of jobs. And I think we all will lobby hard to try and make sure that the change is not drastic. But in the round of things, what reduction could you live with?
During the first series of meetings that we had as an industry in early August, we asked ourselves, if we asked the question, the right question, if you don't have a problem, be part of the solution, right? So what's the solution? And really, our number was 3.5, Mr. Dunn, to answer your question, in the near term. But certainly the number began with a 3, not a 1.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
I had intended to ask members, if you go to page 29 of your pack, you'll see that there's a table where the responses are in. And your biggest concern is to drop from 4 rocks to 1.6 in the very small stuff. But in terms of the proposed changes between 50 kilowatts and 250 kilowatts, are you content for that to change from 2 to 1.6?
As an industry, our membership have not been involved in anything which is larger than 50 kilowatts. I think we can count on one hand the install. To say that the industry is a tad agnostic on that because we have not been engaged in Northern Ireland is a fair reflection of where we're at.
Sorry.
But we're not in the mindset of lobbying or trying to agree to cuts, but it would have a negligible impact on where we are right now.
Okay. One of the things I should have said earlier on, we're not part of NISTA. We obviously, I like to see them acting on behalf of the industry. We're not acting on behalf of the industry. And Action Renewables has been involved in 2 feasibility studies for PV farms. So these were between 2 and 5 megawatts. So they're not the nature, the scale of what we've been talking about this morning. Both of those at 2 rocks were feasible until both of them were charged for grid connection, and then they both just fell over. So at the moment, this is just my opinion, and they may well completely disagree with what I'm about to say. It doesn't matter whether it's 2 or 1.6. When you try and connect it into the grid, and the cost of the grid connection is more than the cost of your 2 megawatt PV farm, it doesn't make any difference.
Okay. You can agree to differ on that if you want.
Okay.
So thanks very much for your briefing. It's been very useful, and we'll reflect on it. Are members content? Are you content to respond to writing down any further questions that we may have at a later stage?
Of course.
Right. Are members content to write to the Housing Executive to ask more detail on the scheme and to seek its views on the future viability of the scheme beyond March?
Yeah, I agree.
Right.
Are members content to consider this matter further following the Department's response on the outcome of the consultation, which is due to be considered by the committee on the 2nd of December?
Right.
Right.
Okay. Clerk and Deputy Chair, thank you very much.
Thank you. Members, we move on to agenda item number 6, which is matters arising. The 4 items of the matters arising index at page 38. Are members content with the suggested actions? Agreed, Gordon?
Agreed.
Table today are 3 items for matters arising. An index of these is at page 17 of your table of papers. Are members content with suggested actions?
17.
17, right.
What page is that, sorry, Chair?
17.
Just to repeat that action.
No problem.
Is that in the new papers?
Table ones. I'll go through it again.
Aye.
All the best.
Do you hear any of it, Fergal?
No, I couldn't.
No problem. Agenda item 6, matters arising. There are 4 items in the matters arising index at page 38, and the papers are from pages 39 to 45. Are members content with the suggested actions listed on the table?
Great.
There are 3 tabled items for matters arising. An index of these is at page 17 of table papers. Members content with the suggested actions?
Great, yeah.
Agenda item number 7 is to do with legislation, the SL1, the Health and Safety Fees Amendment Regulations for 2014.
Great.
Papers for this item include a cover note at page 47 and the SL1 itself. Page 48, the SL1 is subject to negative resolution and the proposed date of operation is in November or December 2014. This is the committee's opportunity to consider the policy set out in the SL1 as it is not possible to amend this once the rule has been made and laid in the Assembly Business Office. Members content with the policy proposals at this stage?
Great.
Agenda item number 8, another piece of legislation, the SL1, the gas and electricity licence modification and appeals regulation. Papers for this item include a cover note at page 62 and the SL1, which is at page 63. This SL1 is also subject to negative resolution and the proposed date of operation is in December 2014. This is the committee's opportunity to consider the policy set out in the SL1 as it is not possible to amend this rule once it's been laid in the Assembly Business Office. Members content with the policy proposal at this stage?
Great.
Agenda item number 9, an SL1 on the health and safety miscellaneous repeals, revocations and amendments regulation of 2014. Inform members the papers for this item are at page 67 and include a briefing note on the SL1, which is at page 68. This SL1 is also subject to negative resolution and the proposed date of operation is also in December 2014. This is the committee's opportunity to consider the policy set out in the SL1 as it is not possible to amend this once the rule has been made and laid in the Assembly Business Office. Members content with the policy proposal at this stage?
Great.
Agenda item number 10, there's a written briefing from Getty on the prompt payment of invoices. There's a 6-month report to the 30th of September 2014. Beginning at page 86 is a report from the Department covering the performance of Getty and its NDPBs on the payment of invoices during the 6 months ending the 30th of September. Members content to ask the Consumer Council for the reasons for the dip in its performance during May and June and what steps have been taken to prevent this happening again. Members content with the rest of it?
Great.
Agenda item number 11, there's a written briefing from Getty on the renewable heat incentive update. This is at page 91, including a paper from the Department providing an update on the RHI. Members, any comments or content to note?
Great.
Chair, if we could just, unless I've missed it, we still don't seem to have a date for the launch of the domestic RHI. And we've had several dates in the past, so the fact that we don't even have an indicative timing at this point is worrying. And it creates greater uncertainty out there, in terms of installers.
Happy enough to write to the Department to ask them for that?
Yes, absolutely.
Agenda item number 12, the Assembly EU Matters newsletter. At the beginning of page 95 is the October edition of the newsletter. There are sections in it on cutting red tape for SMEs, energy costs and subsidies in the EU and the European entrepreneurial region. Agenda item number 13 is correspondence. There are 6 items of correspondence included in your papers. The index is at page 101 and papers from pages 102 to 117. Are members content for the correspondence to the Consumer Council in order that they can agree a joint response with Trading Standard Service, which is agenda item, or it's number 5 in your index?
Great.
Great.
Members content with the suggested actions for the remaining items?
Great.
I think number 6 has been considered with the Minister earlier in the meeting, but I think the organisation writing in have been requested an opportunity to brief the committee. Are we content to request a written briefing at this stage just to do with the tourism events funding?
Great,
as far as I remember, happy enough to request a written briefing?
We've all been individualised with letters from various organisations worrying concerns, so to start going into
happy enough to request a written briefing, seeing as the last opportunity to brief the committee. Okay. In your table papers, there are 8 items of correspondence in there, and an index of these is at page 52. Members content with the suggested action as outlined in the table? Happy enough, Gordon?
Yeah,
great.
great.
You're our leader here. Agenda item number 14, any other business. There is one additional item of business. Inform members that table today is a proposed legislative consent motion for the deregulation bill, which is at page 76 of table papers. The Department has informed the committee that this is due to be debated in the Assembly on the 1st of December, but can be postponed should members wish. There are provisions in the bill relating to both DARD and DALE. Are members content to write to the 2 committees concerned to ask what, if any, information they have received in relation to these matters?
Great.
Members content to ask officials to answer questions on the legislative consent motion when they brief the committee on the insolvency bill next week?
Great, yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Members, any further additional items of business? No. The date, time and place of the next meeting will be room 29 in Parliament Buildings on Tuesday the 11th of November at 10 a.m.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly